Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was in Lord of the Rings. Sauron is defeated, his ring destroyed. However, when an old enemy of the Dark Lord takes advantage of the power void and seeks it for himself, the heavens look to the only match in withered hope. In a time where Sauron's human life had just ended, will he be saved and return to the light and save Arda? Or shall vengeance and power condemn him to shadow? The Dark Lord rises. Welcome aboard. Chapter 20. Deep in the darkest pits of the Cloud Village, where the most violent and powerful villains and psych patients are held, there was a cage where they once held the untamed Eight Tails. Its seals nearly as powerful and impenetrable as those of the fourth Hokage. It now held another. Chains wrapped around and through the cage like a great spider had weaved them. Seals etched every link, some new, some as old as the time of the Sage of Six Paths. The combined power and knowledge of the six nations were placed upon this cell. Their fear and horror clear of the being they seek to bind. In the center, bound at every joint, forced to kneel with his gaze to the ground. On the other side of those chains, bound by wrist, neck, chest, and leg, Sauron knelt. His arms pulling high and back, collar at the neck bound to the floor, a chained belt and chest harness. While the Kage would have preferred to be guards within range of him, the White Council convinced them that if any were to be allowed within earshot, the Dark Lord could and would corrupt them. And so, guards and prisoners alike were moved far from where they could hear him. After the Shinobi did all they could to restrain him, the White Council stepped in and reinforced the barriers and bindings. In no conceivable manner could the Dark Lord himself break free. The White Council stood there now in the shadows, their discerning gazes upon the being that had troubled Middle-earth through 3 ages. His armies nearly conquered all on many occasions, powerful kingdoms of men, elf, and dwarf fell, never to rise again. It took all to unite in order to defeat him, yet returned again, and though their number dwindled over time, they united yet again to destroy him for a final time. Or so they thought. Naruto OST, tragic. The silence was broken by Tsunade, blasting through the doors with bloodshot and tear-filled eyes. Her fist was shaking violently as she looked at the shadow. Tell me it isn't true. Tsunade pleaded angrily. She had heard what happened at the main camp. Tell me you aren't him. Again, he was silent, but the Dark Lord's eyes looked up to see the heartbroken woman. The look of disbelief and betrayal, it was nearly enough to make him crack. Almost. His voice came out demonic yet smooth and calm. What would you have me say, Tsunade? Sauron asked. She bashed her fist against the cage, sending resonations throughout its entirety. That it isn't true, she roared, that you are my Naruto. Not this dark monster that they are claiming you to be. Tell me you aren't Sauron and I will tear this cage apart with my bare hands. Silence once again reigned for what felt like an eternity before Sauron finally spoke. This time, while he still used his dark voice, the voice of Naruto was there right beside it. I am sorry, Granny, he apologized, a mild softness in his eyes toward the only living person in his life he could say was like a mother to him, but what they say is true. I am Sauron, I am the Lord of the Rings, I am the Dark Lord. The air from Tsunade's lungs quickly left her, so too did her strength as she dropped to her knees and cried, wishing that she could tear through the bars and hold her boy. To smack him over the head for doing something stupid like she used to. She got him back, damn it. Now he's the most feared being since creation. How, she sobbed, how did you become this Naruto? She looked up at him. At this moment they were at the same height and were able to lock eyes. This world is chaos, he told her. Since the moment of creation where Morgoth wove his own music into the world, chaos reigns supreme. People who should have stood side by side instead turned their blades onto each other's throats. I watched civilizations fall and, on several occasions, I didn't even have to raise a finger. I saw that this world needs a strong hand if it is to have order. Tsunade went wide-eyed. He sounded so much like Pain and Madara, peace through power. The Naruto I know would find a better way, she cried out. At this point she was getting angry. He always sought peace through cooperation and working together. Too many people have prejudices and hates that they cannot release. Throughout all of history, from the time of Middle-earth, to the clashes of gods, to the great world wars, and even now in this time, the only moments in history people truly united were either under the banner of power or against it. Tsunade couldn't bear this. What happened to you, Naruto? What happened to make you into this? With no emotion he answered, ask your apprentice, before lowering his head, ending the conversation. Tsunade gathered herself with a deep breath and went to the door before stopping to turn one final time. You didn't give up on me, she told her. No matter what, I will not give up on you. And with that she was gone. Naruto OST, Will-O-the-Wisp. The White Council and the Kages along with their top advisors watched on as Tsunade walked away. None faulted her for breaking down as she did. Word got around of the accomplishments of Naruto Uzumaki, as well as the familial bond he held with the woman he saved. In truth, even the Raikage's heart was softened. If B had become even something slightly similar to the man they watched, he would be heartbroken too. But they had to look at things logically and strategically. How could this have happened? May asked her fellows. How could he truly be Sauron while having been born in our own time? Things do not work here the same way as they do in the Timeless Halls, Gandalf was now the one to answer. There the Aener can act as they please, visiting distant futures and learn from distant pasts. Though we are forbidden by law to act outside of time, it appears that law may have been broken and the soul of young Naruto was pulled to the dawn of time and reforged. Wait, so if that is true? Shikaku said. Which comes first? Performing such a feat creates a closed loop for that person, Galadriel answered, no beginning nor end, he simply exists in two times. Such a thing is nearly impossible to control, let alone predict, as one does not know the ramifications as the person standing next to you could be that being, and you never know what they once were or what they might become. Only the most powerful and controlled members of the Aener could accomplish such a feat successfully. And yet this time seems to have failed, said plainly. Elrond nodded, indeed. Therefore, we do not know who broke that law, as any could have made the mistake. Damn! Gaara said, his bloodlust becoming evident, whoever did this, I will grind them until they are nothing but bloody sand. We must keep our minds calm, Shikaku interjected. We do not know what he has been doing since his return. We need to find out what really happened when Naruto saved the ANBU teams. Agreed, said a very angered and bloodshot Tsunade. I would have words with them on this matter, and a few questions of my own. End OST. At the forward camp, Fairy Tale OST, Feelings to Save. Great agony and pain were felt throughout the ranks of the shinobi forces. The Leaf and Sand Shinobi were completely demoralized, as the hero of the Hidden Leaf and the man who was their savior twice now was in fact the Lord of the Rings. The Lightning, Stone, and Mist felt it less, but they had all been saved by the man now revealed to be a genocidal demonic entity. Their mind drifted to the battles that he had fought alongside them, how he turned the tide against the undead shinobi, even taking on the 7 ninja swordsmen alone. Was all that he was and told a lie? The Konoha 12 were taking it the hardest. They hadn't been able to stop crying since the shock expired. The way he looked like everyone else, and the next moment the White Council he attacked, revealing the volcanic monster. Their friend, who had come back from the dead. The one they admired was in truth the Dark Lord. They knew firsthand what he was capable. But to see him deceive them so completely was crushing. In 1 minute, they were celebrating some victories, the very next they watched as Naruto's form changed into a demonic and terrible form before their very eyes. I can't believe this, Shikamaru said. This makes no sense. How is Naruto so dash? Don't you dare say it, Sakura snapped. Her eyes clenched shut as she rapidly shook her long pink hair. That isn't Naruto, it can't be. Ino was right beside her, crying nearly as hard. She had to admit she had taken quite a liking to her fellow blonde since he had returned. He was smart and smooth, and knew how to flatter her without being sexual to the point of being a creep. The others could only imagine what she, Hinata, and above all Natsumi, must be feeling. Grr, this is bullshit, Kiba snarled. It makes no sense at all. He pounded the table as Akamaru whined in sadness. I say we go get some answers ourselves. And what are we supposed to do, Kiba? Niji said, having returned to his cold and aloof self, much to Tenten's regret and fear. We can't just go in and interrogate him ourselves. Suddenly an ANBU appeared. You have been ordered by HQ to return to Kumogakure. This made their eyes widened. 3 days. He then vanished, leaving them in a state of silence. Why can't we? Shikamaru said, his fingers interlocked and his mind in overdrive. What are you saying, Shikamaru? Choji asked. Even he was not in the mood to eat. I say we get in there early and ask him ourselves what is going on, Shikamaru said. The others went wide-eyed. Look, we can either wallow in misery and get ourselves killed out there, or we can find some damn answers from him. The group began to see his reasoning and nodded. Then Churji brought something up. Should we tell Hinata and Natsumi? This made them freeze. Hinata was even worse than when they left her for war, seeing Naruto change. It took all that was left out of her. As for Natsumi, she was in shock. The Mednin and the White Council themselves had a close eye on her. They couldn't risk taking her. Then a voice behind them. Fairy Tail OST, Fairy Tail rises. How can we help? They turned to see that Natsu was the one to ask the question. The entire group of Magi was behind him ready to act. This surprised the shinobi. This is no longer your fight, Shino spoke up. Because the one who hired you is in fact the enemy. It was in that moment that Makarov stepped forward. Be that as it may, he told them, we cannot stand idly by and watch others suffer, and if he truly is who the White Council claimed to be, then he threatens us all, not just you and your people. Natsu spoke up again, smashing his fist into his hand with, besides, if he really is your friend, then we need to beat some sense into him until he remembers that. The shinobi went wide-eyed. This young man, who had no connection with them whatsoever, was prepared not only to fight alongside them, but try to bring their friend back. After a few moments and looking around to see that all of the mage guilds were standing there ready to interact. You are our comrades now, Urza told them, and though we were brought on false pretense, we will not abandon our comrades when they face a foe. And I understand what it's like when a foe was once your closest friend. Her mind went to Jalal for a moment, who was still in Fiori hunted Zirif. Let's go! Natsu yelled as he ran out the door. Without realizing it, shinobi were all running right after them. For a split second they thought his pink hair was blonde. Lightning prison. Outside they watched as Cloud Shinobi of the Investigation and Torture Department paced at the entrance. The Magi sat there quietly as their shinobi counterparts were examining the defenses. Within moments they materialized, scaring the Magi. Man, that's creepy. Natsu barked out, only to have his mouth clamped over. Quiet idiot, we are trying to do this without being caught, hissed Gray, Juvia being her usual self fond over him being cool under pressure. There's a 5-minute window in the change of the guard, Deer told them. When that happens, we go in. Your job is to back us up in case something happens. They nodded. Moments later the guards left. Let's move, and all of them dashed through the entrance. Within the prison, the Magi as requested stayed outside in the event that someone was to arrive, at which point Warren would use his telepathy to warn the shinobi. Like shadows, they dashed through the halls unseen. Though shortly they realized that there were no guards. Had anyone been watching, they would have seen them stand up or away from the shadows as if they had been a part of it. With Falcon leading the group, his Byakugan flared. He looked through every hall, every room, every crevice. It's completely empty, he whispered. The rest were in shock to hear this. Where did everyone go? Immediately all grew uneasy, and in unison they drew their blades. Not even drawing them made a sound. They stood just outside the tailed beast cage before Sloth weaved hand signs, and they all fell into the shadows once more. Had any been there, they would have seen them all vanish and their shadows slide under the great metal door. Roads of Kumo. Hinata, while not in shock, was heartbroken. She watched as her worst fear came true. The man she admired and grew to love was burned away to reveal an evil she had never encountered before. The killing intent he gave off, even after being weakened and subdued by the White Council, was palpable enough to make it hard to breathe. Many fell to their knees and wide-eyed in terror as visions of their slow, painful, and gruesome deaths flashed through their minds. Many lost their meals to their terror. After his declaration he had remained silent. Though the damage was done, the morale of the army was at an ultimate low. It was very possible that the next thing to go wrong would break them. She was already broken. She trained her mind and body for one purpose, to avenge him. Her outer appearance was proof of that. Her low-cut, fishnet-armored undershirt stopped well above her belly, as did her new hoodie, booty shorts, and heels. More prominent makeup now covered her face, all in all giving her a much more attractive and distracting figure. She had trained under Anko after all. In the after of seduction tactics, from movement and how to get others to eye her where she wanted them to, rather than the blade that would end them. All this mental training helped her with her new bold personality, as her confidence in her body as well as her skill as a kunoichi skyrocketed. If you saw her walk down these streets now, however, you would see an entirely different figure. Her small hoodie was wrapped around her like a desperate effort for protection, her eyeshadow and line fell with her tears, and her posture and stride were slumped and shaky. In truth, she was a pitiable sight. Had any seen her in this state, they would either console her. Vampiric music, forever you said. In truth, someone was watching. In a flash of shadow, she vanished as the being grabbed her and took her away, just before a couple rounded the corner. Up on a cliffside, Hinata reappeared, spinning around in confused yet battle-ready, if not a little sluggish. "You poor thing." A familiar yet unknown voice spoke. It was female, and yet it held a secret power in them, a slight echo with each word. Hinata turned to see it was Freya, the woman whom Naruto, Sauron, was close to. She now wore an elegant and form-fitting dress that loosened and flowed at hips. It waved in the high winds like a bloody shadow. Did she know? It must have been heartbreaking seeing him like that. Her voice was, if possible, even more smooth and warm. At the same time there was a seduction to it. It was clear to Hinata that if she and Anko had trained in the art of seduction, this woman before her was the master. She had enraptured all of the Shinobi, the Magi, even many women had to turn blushing as they had impure thoughts. Hinata's survival instincts and training were the only thing keeping her from falling under Freya's spell. "What do you want, Freya?" Hinata snapped, her Byakugan flaring at her opponent. A small grin came across the woman's face, and with her enhanced eyes Hinata realized how much trouble she was in. Her eyes' enhancements made her see every detail of the woman before her. The grin revealed fanged predator-like teeth. Her eyes were a glowing scarlet red with black scara. Her nails, while still feminine and beautiful, looked like they could tear through men as well as any blade. Her features were paler and more seemed to glow against the moon. And finally, just above the valley of her bosom, was the mark of the lidless eye. Again, Freya spoke, glad that her prey was not completely without bite. "Yet, I merely wished to help you, child. It pains me to see you like this." "And how exactly to help, Freya?" asked Hinata, "if that even is your name." A wider fanged grin. "My true name is Thuringwethil," she admitted, "but in your tongue it means the Lady of Shadow." "So, you really are his," Hinata surmised. Freya nodded. "Of course, love. He is the shadow after all," she said as if she were stating the obvious. She walked to the edge of the cliff. "I have stood by my dark master's side since his own master once ruled. I was his emissary, his messenger, and his most trusted guard and lover." She watched as she saw the young woman's heartstrings strain. "So it wasn't for show," she surmised. "You really are his lover." Thuringwethil nodded. Not his only." Hinata looked up at his. He had another as well for a time. He regarded her more as a pet than a true companion, though he did care for her in his own twisted way. The emphasis she placed on the word said it all. Hinata blushed at the thoughts her adversary was planting. However, she was not done. "It is a pity he had to turn on her," she said, almost sad. "We were both glad to hear that Shelob had survived her attackers, though neither of us doubted her." Hinata went pale. She knew that name, the Great Spider. Freya nodded and smiled. "You know your history, or rather the myths and tales they now are." "Yes, like my master she too held a human-like form. She was a dark beauty just as Sauron ensured she was well cared for and fed, despite their falling out. Seems all he ever does is betray those he loves." Hinata said bitterly, before she heard a chuckle. "Says the woman who shattered the heart of the mortal form he once held." "I was brainwashed," he snapped. Freya shrugged. "Maybe so, but you could have resisted." Hinata's eyes lost their Byakugan effects and she looked down in shame. Now, don't be like that, darling," Freya said with a smooth and friendly tone as a hand gently rested upon her fellow woman's bare back. "As I said, I am here to help." Hinata looked up. "How? How in the world am I to prove my love to the man I killed?" The Lady of Shadow grinned again. "Why, by freeing him, of course." Hinata's eyes went wide and she backed away from Freya. "Are you insane?" she asked loud enough to make an echo down the mountain. "He has killed millions." At this Thuringwethil grinned. "Oh sweetheart." Her grin now took a more menacing form. "He has killed far more than that." This sent a chill of Hinata's spine, thankful when Freya broke eye contact and turned to look at the village below. Its light showed the people walking around trying to have a semblance of a normal life, despite the time of war. "The Dark Lord has wiped out kingdoms more powerful than all of your great nations combined," she told Hinata, even once manipulating the Vala to do it for him. "The greatest kingdom of men, swept away by wrathful and foolish entities. The skill of his mind is truly amazing and enticing." Hinata shivered the thoughts away. She had to stay focused. "And why should I help him escape? All of you have said makes it even more clear to keep him locked away." At this Freya walked over to her and cupped the younger woman's chin sensually and lifted her eyes to meet her own. "Because I know one thing. You still love him." Hinata couldn't even leave her sight because she knew Freya's words were true. Despite all she now knew he had done, she could not help but hold out hope that the man she loves is somewhere in there. However, she did not want to betray that truth to Freya. However, her freezing and refusing to move from such a close vicinity was all the proof needed. Now she sprung her trap, her eyes widening slightly and giving off a bit of an unnatural glow as she stared into Hinata's. "Free him and prove that love to him," she challenged, "and maybe he will see that what you did to him truly wasn't of your own doing." This caught Hinata's mind and her eyes widened, looking into Freya's eyes before they grew dim. If she freed him, it could earn his trust and maybe she could save him, maybe turn him from being this dark lord and back to the unpredictable knucklehead she loved. But the deaths he could inflict if she did, was it worth it? Of course, it was worth it, if it meant she could help to save millions more. What would the others think of her? It didn't matter, she knew she needed to do this for their sake. If she proved her love, maybe he'd see they were all controlled. She asked, "How could we get him out?" Freya grinned as she released her and turned her eyes to the prison that held her dark master. "Your people have learned powerful methods of magic as well as their own life force to perform amazing feats, but they pale in comparison to the very magic that molded our reality," she told Hinata. "What magic is this?" Hinata asked. Freya turned to her. "I shall teach you," Freya said with a smile, "then you must give him this." She placed an item in Hinata's hand. She looked down and her eyes slightly twitched as she recognized what she was holding. Dracula Story Untold OST, Broken Tooth. In the shadows, the shinobi slowly regained their forms, surrounding the entire cage inside. To see what they had done to ensure the Dark Lord could not move a single muscle frightened them. What was he capable of? It was in that moment that they now realized their sight had greatly improved. The darkness which they were accustomed with by relying on their other senses now seemed to be nothing more than evening light. It was only by this new sight and pure luck that they were hidden from view as they realized that the Dark Lord was not alone. Walking away from the shadow was the Lady of Light herself, Galadriel, a very troubled look upon her face, and a tear? "Consider my words, Lady Galadriel," the ominous and dark voice of Sauron echoed throughout the room. She said nothing, only having paused to hear his final words on whatever their discussion had been, looking behind her to gaze upon her foe one last time. The flaming eyes of the Dark Lord and the calm gray of the Lady of Light met for a moment before she broke the connection and she left, the great door sealing behind her. For several moments the silence was deafening, then the ominous voice spoke again. "Once before you thought you could conceal yourselves from me," Sauron spoke, "do not insult me by thinking you can succeed this time." They looked at one another, then as one they dropped from their hiding locations. They all walked to the front so that they could all look at the being who was once their friend. "Though I can see past those masks, you can do me the courtesy of removing them," Sauron said. "We are after all friends here." The sarcastic emphasis he put on friends did not go unnoticed, but in an attempt to keep things from getting hostile, they all complied and removed both their ANBU masks and their lower masks as well. All of their faces held hesitation and fear. Looking at the Dark Lord now, he looked just like Naruto, but twisted and darker. Ashen and black skin rather than his tan colors. He looked up at them and his blue eyes were replaced by slitted flaming ones. "Now, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked them. They quietly pondered what they should first say. It was Sakura who spoke first. "What happened to you, Naruto?" she asked. "How did you become this?" Sauron at that moment twisted like a puzzled predator. "Well, I thought that was obvious." In a snap he jerked against his chains. Though they didn't budge, the straining and rattling of the chains was enough to make them jump back, not to mention the rage-filled face and the growling he held. "It was when you bashed my skull in and betrayed me. After I just saved your lives," he roared. Their hearts clenched as the look of pure hate from the man they saw as a fallen hero for 7 years. "We weren't in control." Sakura screamed in protest, her eyes watering. Sauron let out a dark chuckle. "Please, I've seen Uruks break the Bright Lord's control when they were assigned to killing their blood brothers, or even they just wanted to. Had you the strength, you would have refused his dominance?" Each of them lowered their heads in shame, but Sauron was not quite done, relaxing his muscles and settling back to mess with their minds once more. "Why did you come here?" he asked them. "To save your friend from the darkness that you drove him into in search of a lost crush." Sakura felt the stab as if a morgul blade once more pierced her flesh. Her pain of having sent Naruto to his death like a wound ripped open by a serrated blade. The fact that she had pummeled him till he was bloody and unrecognizable was like a raging and painful poison poured into the wound. "Or perhaps to tell me that my destiny is not set in stone?" Sauron asked, looking at Magi, who frowned. The man he admired was lost in the shadow, yet those words hit close to him, remembering the failure who had beaten him and denied destiny his wishes. "Or maybe you simply wish to have a scoop to gossip about," he said as the flaming eyes turned to the platinum blonde beauty. Her eyes grew watery as he struck a blow to the immature child she once was. However, she had the courage to defend herself. "How dare you," she snapped, "you saved my life during our mission with Anko. I saw your power of the Nine Tails and said nothing. Why would I stoop to something so low?" In an instant Sauron spoke with a dirty grin. "You spend enough time on your knees, my dear. I would have thought it would be a natural feeling by now." Ino blushed and at the same time felt shame under the hungry and clearly sexual gaze. At this, one person had heard enough. Chuji had heard enough. "Don't you dare speak to Ino that way," he roared. However, the Dark Lord was not intimidated. "Ah yes, I forgot the fat one has a heart as gentle as his stomach is vast," he said smoothly. Everyone flinched as Chuji tensed up. He growled and everyone went pale. "Don't call me Dash," but Sauron cut him off. "What?" he roared, "fat? Because you are gentle-hearted? Because you are weak? Because you are." Kiba growled menacingly, seeing Chuji's fire wither with each sentence. "Shut up. I ought to come in there and beat some sense into you." The others looked at Kiba in shock. He normally played the self-centered hothead, yet here he was defending his fellow shinobi. Sauron once again grinned, a thing that was really getting on Kiba's nerves. Sauron voiced. Kiba continued, "I ought to come in there and knock some sense into you." "Brave words from the boy who cowered before me in the night of the blood moon," Sauron said with his dark grin still on his face, watching Kiba go pale. "That was you?" he asked, his sudden instincts kicking in again. Sauron nodded. "Wasn't hard to put you in your place." Now it was Ten who walked up to the cage, unable to fathom the drastic change. "I can't believe this is really you," she said. "You were the one who fought through the hate of village and became a hero. You gave Niji, myself, and so many other the desire to pursue our dreams and goals. Why would you throw it all away? And how the hell did you become this anyway?" Sauron grew quiet for a moment, looking down at the ground, his mind suddenly remembering the moment Cammy came to him, or rather the name her knew her to be, Nienna. "Every man has his breaking point," he said. At this they felt sorrow and pity for their friend, even a little bit of hope. Maybe Naruto was still in there after all. But then his hateful gaze returned. "Mine was when the few people I had grown to care for and have a kinship with tore my body to shreds, ripped apart my mind, and made my heart explode in my chest. They knew they could not defend themselves in this, because no matter what they knew to be true, the blood of their friend was still on their hands. This world is flawed. In my time watching the world, humanity, the Eldar, and dwarf folk always turned upon one another. More times than I can count for foolish reasons. I will untie this world and there will be peace." At this Shikamaru spoke up, sensing something wrong in all this. "Why are you telling us this?" The shadow smiled. "While you are perhaps one of the greatest strategic minds of this time, there is nothing you can do to stop me," he declared. "I do what must be done, and I will not let anyone stop me." At this Sakura spoke softly, "You sound like Sasuke." Sauron tilted his head toward her. "Unlike the pitiful boy who left you to seek power, I seek order. Peace, if you will, but I will succeed." At this moment, having been silent for a while, Shino speaks up. "That is hard to believe. That is because you are in chains. The White Council captured you, and your schemes have been thwarted." Sauron's grin did not leave for a moment. That's what scared them. Aside from the 2 moments he snapped to spook them, he was clearly the man in control. "Have they now?" Sauron said with a chuckle, making a chill run down their spines. The Dark Lord spoke up. "Make no mistake, I have been here since the beginning of time, and while I could not interact physically, I have been around during every age of man, altering it and manipulating events to my will." At that moment guards rushed in, one of them having walked into the observation room and activated the alarm. Soon 30 members of the Kumo investigation and torture units rushed in. The ANBU slammed their masks into their faces and drew their blades. "Surrender," one yelled. "You're outnumbered." "We are not enemies." Sakura yelled. "We are interrogating him." Another Kumo shinobi spoke. "I'm sorry, but the Kage and the White Council have both ordered that any who come here will be incarcerated until it is certain they are not under the Dark Lord's influence. We do not want to harm fellow shinobi, but we will die before letting him escape." Davy Jones' theme. Suddenly they heard something, music? But it wasn't like any normal music they heard before. It seemed to pierce their very soul. The voice was a beautiful one, yet it was filled with sorrow, yet at the same time devotion and love. "It seems that will be arranged," the shadow smiled darkly. Everyone turns to the dark hall that they had just come from. The music slowly grew louder and louder. Suddenly with it came the voice of a beautiful woman. Her silhouette appearing from the shadows, cruel and cold like winds on the sea. Will you ever return to me? Hear my voice. Sing to the night. My love will never die. Suddenly, out of the shadows stepped a woman that surprised even the Dark Lord, Hinata. Her beautiful voice sent her sad and loving melody throughout the prison. The shinobi began to feel cold, their confidence breaking. In the cold light of the moon, I will give up my heart for you. For my lord, the blazing eye. My love will never die. Hinata! Kiba yelled in shock, what the hell are you doing? She didn't answer, however, only continued her siren song. Suddenly they saw another woman, Freya, walking up beside her and began to sing alongside her. What none realized was that behind them, the Dark Lord's hands rotated before clenching themselves into a fist. Come my love, break shackles, and be free. Rule with me for eternity. Scorch all dreams so mercilessly. And leave their souls to me. Suddenly they heard the sound of groaning metal, they turned around and their hearts sank in fear. Sauron was forcing his way to his feet, the magic seals were waning and the seals on the jutsus themselves were failing. Why are they failing? A guard yelled. They didn't get to ask why, as in that very moment the chains ripped out of the walls with huge chunks of said wall coming with it and crushing a few guards. Play the song you sang long ago. And wherever the shadow goes, you will find the key to my heart. We'll never be apart. The ANBU moved to subdue him, yet in a sudden blast of power they were all sent into the walls. The guards being further away did not receive as hard an impact and charged back in. Still the women sang their song as their dark master broke his chains and used them to destroy any who came at him. Two ran at him and he whipped the chains around their neck before tugging hard enough to snap them and swing them into other guards. He launched forward and with his bare hands burned two more into a crisp. Even more were crushed by the stone pieces at the edge of his chains. Wild and strong, you can't be contained. Never bound, nor ever chained. Wounds you cause can never mend. And you, my lord, won't end. There the Dark Lord stood in his Titan form, his black armor giving off such immense heat that the bindings remaining on him merely melted away. With thudding metallic steps his massive form walked over to the two women. At this minute the ANBU managed to regain their senses in time to see Sauron towering over Hinata. Freya at this moment ceased her song and lowered herself to her knees in submission. Hinata looked up and slowly finished her song. Cruel and cold like winds on the sea. Will you ever return to me? Hear my voice. Sing to the night. My love will never die. In her outstretched hand and opened it, revealing an all too familiar golden ring. All the while she suddenly realized, she just sold her soul to the devil. And, hello everyone, sorry it took such a long time to post this one, had to take my last finals and graduate. Anyway, here is the new chapter. For those of you wondering about this magic, either look up how Middle-earth was created in the first place, or wait until I explain it in the story. Either way, I want to make a shout out to Philaja. She actually made the original song based on Davy Jones. If you have not heard the song before, I would highly recommend you look it up on YouTube. I merely tweaked it a little to fit the scenario. Anyway, leave comments on what you think, as I always enjoy hearing your thoughts on my work, even gives me a few ideas. Also, I want to extend an offer to those who have a bit more musical talent. Please PM me, as I'd love to hear your opinion on some things I'm trying to work on for later chapters. However, there is one thing that puzzles me. Over the course of my story, I have received many reviews and PMs from you, my readers, and for that I am extremely thankful. However, there is something that puzzles me, the amount of contempt that there is for Hinata. So, while I work on the next chapter, I'm going to ask everybody two questions. 1. For those of you who say no to Hinata, give me a well-thought-out reason why. It will make more sense if you explain what causes your dislike. For those of you who like Hinata, my Hinata is more of a Tsukuyami version, JFYI, please share your opinion as well. 2. If there is another woman with Sauron aside from Freya, and I'm not saying whether there is/will be one, who would you prefer and how you expect the relationship to behave? This includes everyone from LOTR, Naruto, Fairy Tail, Show Not Just Guild, and Avatar. I will give all of you some time to work your opinions. Please do your best to convince me on this while I work on the new chapter. Thank you everyone for appreciating and following my stories as well as the comments. Thank you everyone. Chapter 21, The Dark Lord's Might, The Tide of Darkness. Dracula Untold, Prologue. The Dark Lord looked upon his ring, the blazing symbols upon it glowed even brighter as if overjoyed to be reunited with its master. The feeling of his full power returning to him was akin to an addict getting his fix. While he had held it before after he returned and even wore in on a chain in front of the others, he marveled in its beauty after seeing it properly for so long. It was then that he heard the small splash of a foot against a liquid. He looked down to see it was Hinata whose foot had gone back and stepped in blood. The blood he had just spilt of the men and women who tried to stop him. He had to admit, all of the possibilities that he foresaw, this was not one of them. Hinata, the pure and incorruptible soul, giving herself to the darkness. Hinata could not help but feel terrified. Standing over her was the most powerful being in the mortal realm since the beginning of time. The heat emitting from his form was so intense that she felt as if she were going to melt. But heat and terror were not the only things she felt in this moment. She also felt shame. Hinata Kiba groaned as he tried to stand. What are you doing? Shame that she had just betrayed her closest friends, her family, her people. What had she done? This is all to save Naruto. Yes, that was right, it was all to save him, to pull him back from the darkness and in turn save those she also cared for. But still, had she done the right thing? You want to abandon him? Of course not, and if she had to go into the darkness herself to save him, she would embrace the shadow. So consumed was she by the inner turmoil and dark influence, she did not notice a tendril of shadow smash Kiba into a wall. My master, the Lady of Shadow said reverently and with devotion, welcome back to the land of the living. Yet he did not speak, not even acknowledge her presence, only stared directly at the Hyuga heiress. She could not see it, but she felt him peer into every portion of her being. Freya smiled as she understood exactly what the Lord of Mordor was doing. Hinata too knew he was waiting for something, as if what she had just done was not enough. Seeing what Thuringwethil had knelt into the pooling blood in reverence, she too knelt in the blood she helped spill, giving into the influence. Sitting on her heels she spoke, swallowing her fears and daring to look directly at her new dark master. My life I pledge, she said, her conviction and determined nature returning to her, her pale eyes replaced into a blazing fire similar to that of the Nazgul, the symbol of the Great Eye appearing on her bosom just as Freya, to the Dark Lord Sauron. He seemed to be content, for upon hearing those words he nodded. His menacing voice rang out, though it was not as dark and malicious as it did when he first returned from hell. It had the same power and echo, yet it sounded, if just a hint, more human. You have served me well, Thuringwethil, he said, acknowledging his loyal servant's presence, yet I admit I am surprised in you bringing me the heiress. She lifted her own eyes to Sauron, her voice now that of a dark goddess. I bring her as tribute, and an opportunity to bring further suffering to those who betrayed you. He did not respond, though she knew he was pleased. Walking past them to the exit, they both remained still. Come, he ordered, we have work to do. The Lethe and Bu, their bodies too weak to move, could only watch in despair as the two women rose their feet and followed the shadow. Outside the prison, vicious storm clouds covered the village, lightning tore through the sky. All manner of beasts turned wild in fear as they rushed to safety. To the Magi, the magic in the storm was not only noticeable, it was palpable. So too was the menace and might. Terror filled their very being, for not even the mighty master Hades could summon such terrible power. Something's gone wrong, muttered Urza, this dark magic is filling the very air we breathe. Sure enough, it was getting very difficult for the Magi and the Shinobi in the area as they too could feel the immense power. Two of the Magi, however, were feeling the effects on a much more violent scale, Natsu Dragneel and Mirajane Strauss. We have to get in there now. Natsu roared, summoning his flames and rushing forward. Surprising to the others, Mira rushed in with him. Fairy Tale OST, huge dragon on the move. Natsu! Mira, wait! Urza shouted and rushed after them, so did the rest of the Magi. Just before they could get to the doors, however, they were blown away. Everyone leapt away to avoid the 3-ton doors, which embedded themselves into nearby buildings. When they turned back, their eyes widened at the sight before them. Just within the door was a shadowy mass, its form slowly yet constantly changing. Tendrils swirled through the air like long hair from a person submerged beneath the waves. The dark magic was formless and endless, neither Magi nor Shinobi could figure out what to make of it nor their next action. Suddenly the shadowy mass burst into flames, flames that promised nothing but death and destruction. Its heat was so intense that not even Natsu could withstand the total destruction it promised. Suddenly the violent flame began to take form. Slowly their eyes were filled with despair as the flames took form of the flaming eye. The slit of the eye slowly began to take form of a tall being walking toward them. When it did, the massive flames vanished, and before them stood the Dark Lord, his terrible black armor adding more menace to his presence. Fear gripped their very souls, telling them to run, to hide for as long as they could, or to beg for mercy. The ominous magic that flowed from the dark being before them. His helmed gaze passed over each and every one of them. Then, just like that, it was gone. Sauron's form vanished, as did the dreadful magic, replaced by a man in white robes, flowing and beautiful. Looking closer, they realized it was Naruto's face, though it was more angular and lacked the marks on his face. His hair was calmer rather than the wild spiked mess it once was. The most recognizable part of his were his eyes, the same cerulean blue that they had known during his time with them. It was then that he spoke, his voice smooth and friendly. "Hello, my friends." It was a beautiful sound to their ears, yet lacking none of the power. If anything, it may hold more. With fear no longer dulling their senses, however, their minds were their own once more. Urza was the first to lash out. "You call us friends, yet you betray your comrades." Sauron merely tilted his head. "And when did I betray you?" he asked. "Last I checked you when I fought side by side against the mad Uchiha's clone army. When did I attempt to strike at you?" Urza was quiet for a moment, though her deadly glare was still there. Before she could respond, Laxus stepped forward, a few bolts dancing around his form. "From what levy, the White Council, and everyone from the Leaf, you have been causing them nothing but terror and bloodshed." Ezra added to this, "Unleashing a pack of dire wolves, haunting and demoralizing their people, crucifying their ones who were your friends." She roared, "Even desecrating their hero's statue. Are you even him?" Nastu asked him, "Are you even Naruto? Or was that a lie as well?" At this Sauron folded his arms, but it was not him who answered. It was Levi. "Yes, it's him." They all looked at the bookworm, who seemed to be in terrified awe of the living and very deadly history before her. Sauron's blue eyes and her own locked. The original script for his name was Tauron or Thoron. "One of them is the perfect anagram for Naruto," she told the others. At that their hearts sank, yet their fear increased. They had heard from the other ninja had to say about the hero of the Hidden Leaf. He alone had taken out the most horrific terrorist organization in the Hidden Nations, and that was only his last action. He had taken on monsters that by the side of it matched if not surpassed the dragons they faced in the capital city, faced stone demon armies, even taking on the actual demon itself and obliterating it. He had changed the course of nations, and in a few cases, he had removed leaders, many of these when he was only 13. If that was the case, then the man before them not only was a mastermind and powerful being of the past, but judging by what they heard and the vicious fight they witnessed on the Cloud Village bridge, he was a very deadly combatant. They heard a small chuckle come from the Lord of Gifts. My, you have done your homework, young lady. Such a mind like yours would be a great asset to the world I will bring." Jet and Droy stood in front of her protectively, however it was Gajeel who responded, his draconic heritage emerging with his deadly gaze and growl that only a dragon can make. "You come anywhere near Levi and I will tear you to ribbons," he snarled, his steel armor covering his form and mist-like shadows flowing gently around his feet. At this Sauron looked upon the steel shadow dragon. Lot Ost, Lothlorien. "Gajeel," Sauron said in a friendly and peaceful manner, "you misunderstand me, my friend. I have no desire to harm any of you. In fact, I am asking for your help." This caught them by surprise. He wanted their help. "This world is controlled by chaos and war," he continued, walking toward them, his smooth and enticing voice piercing their minds. "I would see it come to an end, so much death and destruction at the hands of one another, of great beasts who think themselves superior and wipe out entire civilizations. Dark magi and ambitious leaders who would sacrifice their own people for the sake of power. With the might of the most powerful guilds of Fiori, who fight for their comrades and to vanquish evil, you could be my elite enforcers, the ones I entrust with ensuring the peace." They had to admit, it was an enticing offer, yet he continued, this time in an effort to inflate their ego. "You destroyed Lullaby, stopped Jalal, defeated the Oration Cease twice, vanquished Grimoireheart, and eradicated an entire army of demons. You even stopped the dragons themselves from wiping out your capital city, saving millions." They could hear the admiration and impressed tone in his voice, and they had to admit it felt good being acknowledged by such a powerful being, and that is just one guild. "With your power and the other guilds here by your side, together we could change the course of history, unite the peoples of the world and bring forth an era of peace and prosperity." To all of them, the idea was sound. Many of them were powerful enough to take on armies on non-magicals. Their presence had made resounding victories across the board in the Allied Shinobi War. They could easily help achieve peace. All of them were deeply considering joining the man before them. Except Urza, you deceptive snake, she roared, snapping the others out of the trance. Your hypnotic gaze and honeyed words do not fool my eye. I see the truth behind your words. At this everyone else snapped out of it, only now recognizing the unearthly glow that had appeared in his eyes as well as the one ring. They were fortunate Urza's eye was artificial and therefore immune to hypnotic suggestion. You promise peace, yet what you truly seek is domination, she roared, pointing her blade directly under Sauron's throat. You wiped out entire civilizations who stood against you. Leave nothing but bloodshed and darkness in your wake. You mauled those who loved you and called you friends. You're no better than Acnologia. At this Sauron, his eyes lowering before returning to their more flaming appearance, he was no longer being cordial. If you knew my reasons, he told her, you would really consider whose side you are on. At this it was the fire dragon who lost his temper now. There is no reason for you to betray your friends. The others look at him in shock at the outburst. I don't know what's gotten a hold of your mind, but you cannot turn your back on the ones who cared about you. Natsu. Lucy whispered, a tear going down her face. He continued to yell at the Dark Lord, I spoke to the ones who knew you. Every single one of them admired and loved you. You were the best of them, your heart was pure and you encouraged people to be better than they were. They thought you were dead and you torment them by returning only to reveal yourself as this horrid being. They were friends. Your family. The Magi were speechless for a moment. They all knew that if anything it was more important than fighting and becoming stronger, was the bonds of friendship and family. Tears fell from his face from anger and sorrow as he thought on the pain despair that their new friends had been forced to endure, twice now. Sauron however kept his face stern and cold. I cannot afford the luxury of friends, he said. This world is corrupted and violent, it requires power to unite the world. Fairy Tale OST, Fairy Law. Now it was Laxus' turn to lose it. Power does not amount to peace, he roared. The others look at him, his aura glows a powerful golden, lighting dancing on his form violently. Power corrupts wholly and without consideration. Those who seek power for power's sake destroy any who get in their path, whether they are friend or foe. All knew about the attempted coup he had led, and they could not help but admire the man he now represented, and they will be destroyed by those who unite against them to defend their people and their family. Urza could not help but smile at her fellow S-class member, though she admitted she wished Gildarts and the Saints were here at the moment. Unfortunately, they had been called into a meeting with the Kages and the White Council. Silence for a few moments reigned as Sauron and Laxus stare off, then he spoke again. I find your end goal commendable, however your methods are unacceptable, and if you continue, I will have no choice but to stop you. At that his power burst to life, as he did every S-class wizard stepped forward and flared their own power as well. Behind them the rest of the Magi flared their own magic as well. It was clear that the Magi were not going to take this lightly. Sauron only sighed before looking back up at the Magi. So be it. Akatsuki Base, Haydn's choir theme. Sasuke awoke with a start as he leapt from his bed to check his body for wounds. A moment later he remembered all that had happened, the blind rage at the sight of the Black Hand, dueling the cloaked menace, only to be soundly defeated by who was revealed to be Naruto, somehow alive. You wake, Madara said with a pleased tone, I was afraid your injuries would have you down for much longer. His Sharingan flared as he glared at Madara, however his anger faded as he realized they were not alone. A glowing specter, its face wrinkled and rotten, yet the glow itself was majestic. Judging by the armor he wore, not only was he warrior. Cautiously he walked up to the pair. He hadn't been near a phantom before, but it seemed he and Madara were cordial at least. The phantom addresses him, calm yourself young Uchiha, you are going to need your strength. Who the hell are you? He demanded. Madara responded. This is Celebrimbor, he is archenemy for the Dark Lord, Madara answered, and the one who has guided men like me and the Akatsuki for man generations. Suddenly the memories of combating his friend. What the hell happened to Naruto? He yelled. At this Celebrimbor spoke bluntly. Your friend is the shadow that threatens to consume all life. At this Sasuke's eyes widened. It couldn't be. Madara seemed to have read his mind. I am afraid that his words are true, he said in an almost pitted tone. Your friend is in fact the Dark Lord that we have been striving to defeat and unite the world against. Sasuke could only ask in a hollow tone, his hair covering his eyes. What now? The Bright Lord was the one to answer. Now we are at war, and I have a task for you, he said, as Madara walked a small distance away. You are to go to the front and assist in the recapture of the tailed beasts, he told him. but first you must locate a blade that can harm them. Sasuke gripped his chokodo. And what is wrong with the blade I wield? The Bright Lord scoffed. Your blade, while impressive for your age, is completely useless against the powers of darkness. Only a blade forged of the old ways can harm the Nine and their master. How else do you think the high kings of elves and men were able to combat the shadow? Madara returned at this point. The only other physical weapons that can harm them are the chakra rods used by Rinnegan users, but the metal is frail and unrefined. All other manner of weapons shatter upon their armor or disintegrate and plague the attacker with the black breath. He held out to the younger Uchiha a black katana and a ring of the Akatsuki. This blade will be strong enough to handle a few power blows, but do not rely on it to save from a blow. Use it to wound the Nazgul just enough to send them back to their master. Should this weapon break, you will be defenseless. Sasuke took the blade, and the ring? It will provide you with similar abilities as my own Celebrimbor stated, though weaker, it will be enough to keep the Nazgul at bay for a time. Sasuke holstered the weapon and placed the ring onto his finger. And what am I to do in the even this blade breaks? The Bright Lord answered, you must travel into the lands of old, where the ruins of the old word and ancient spirits yet linger. There you will find perhaps the only weapon that the Dark Lord fears. Sasuke was intrigued by this. He could not help but feel angered that Naruto was now the most powerful being in the mortal realm. Every ounce of power he could take he would. How will I know the weapon? He asked. The Bright Lord answered, a distance and appreciative air in his tone. This blade is unlike any other in all creation, he told him, a sword that had made many a king lead armies as well as vanquish them. It had united the realm more than one occasion against the forces of evil. While there are other weapons of simple caliber, none will have the impact as it will in the presence of the Dark Lord. Sasuke liked this. I'll look into it. He packed his belongings. Madara spoke. Once you retrieve the blade, return and release your vengeance upon the armies of shadow, Madara ordered. Sasuke only grunted in affirmative as he took his team and were on their journey, Madara's map tight in hand. The two looked at the departing members for a moment. Madara spoke with a quiet, matter-of-fact voice, you know his ambitions will betray us. The Bright Lord nodded as he watched Sasuke and his team depart into the wilderness. It matters not, so long as he wields one of my rings, he will be kept in line, said Ringlord eerily as Sasuke thought on what he had just learned, looking at the map that had been wrapped around the sheath of the blade. If it's true that no mortal weapon can harm him, I feel sorry for anyone that dares to challenge him. Fairy Tale, Scarlet Warrioress. The chaos of battle reigned. The shinobi could only watch in awe at the powers summoned by the Magi. Their spells were massive and required no complex signal. Over and over, they pounded the Dark Lord, who hadn't even recovered enough to strike back. A powerful blow from Elfman sent Sauron careening toward awaiting Urza, summoning Heaven's Will to strike at him with the pentagram sword technique, while Kagwara's techniques cut deep into him. Laxus followed up with a heavenly halberd, and the Dark Lord was engulfed in a massive torrent of yellow lightning before Olga summoned his own black lightning, striking the shadow with the might of a dragon and a god. They knew if they were to have any hope of subduing him they needed to keep him off balance, and so they continued their assault. Bacchus appeared to strike all the vulnerable areas for Elfman to return again in his beast soul and crush him into the ground before throwing him toward Grey and Lion. Ice make, cold Excalibur, he roared as he brought a massive ice sword down on his foe. Meanwhile Lion summoned an ice dragon to pound into him. All of their blows were enhanced tenfold by Windy and Sharia, whose own visages were grim and determined. Mira summoned her initial Satan soul and blasted him with an evil blast before Sting and Rogue charged. Blow after blow the two of them landed with their enhanced dragon strength and powers. Light and Shadow pounded into him enough to crush his face. The both of them leapt back for Laxus to lunge forward and deliver a massive uppercut. He flew for what appeared to be a mile. Just as he reached his peak, the three fairy tail dragons appeared with their cats holding them into the air, each of them taking in a deep breath. Sky Dragon. Wendy called to the heavens. Steel Dragon. Gadgil growled in rage. Fire Dragon. Natsu bellowed at the top of his lungs. Roiarr, and from their lungs emitted a menacing and powerful attacks that blasted the shadow and sent him crashing into the ground. The explosion was immense. Dust and debris filled the area to the point that no sight could pierce its veil. However, they did see a powerful purple glow appear. It was then that they knew their plan had worked. They had bought enough time for Fried and Levy to write an enchantment cage to hold him. Their most powerful spells were put into it and no man could ever hope to escape. Endost. As the dust settled slowly, the shinobi looked on in awe and the Magi smiled and emitted small laughs of relief at having succeeded. Seeing that the battle was over, Shinobi guards quickly leapt in and drew their weapons, pointing it at the magic cage. The Leaf A and BU members at this time also ran out, their masks long since destroyed from Sauron's initial attack, but they had recovered enough to force themselves to their feet and pursue their lost friend. Their eyes were filled with shock at seeing the Magi standing triumphant. "Excellent work everyone," Fried said, sheathing his blade, "you bought us enough time to hinder him from harming anyone else." They all smiled at one another. Once again the darkness had been defeated by the power of family. Pieces of Eden, Satan's arrival. Suddenly, a dark and terrible laughter could be heard, a laughter not of this world, darker than Jose, more maniacal than Zero, mightier than Master Hades, more malignant than Acnologia himself. "Hinder me, the sound of terrible, foolish mortals. None may hinder the shadow." Within the enchantment barrier no longer stood the handsome and an admirable form of Anatar, now towering over them stood his true form, that of the Dark Lord Sauron. So filled with awe and terror they could not even move, their bodies shaking and cold sweat drenched Shinobi and Magi alike. The Dark Lord slow raised his right hand to chest height, his palm up, the ring of power glowing menacingly. Then, by simply clenched his fist, a burst of power ripped from him and the barrier which surrounded him shattered like glass. Madness took hold of the Shinobi nearest him and they charged blindly, their weapons raised. However, their blades were those of mortal men, and like the earthbender who had given into his own madness, their weapons shattered against the Dark Lord's armor. With a glance, Earth Spike materialized and impaled them through their backs and out their chests. Life left them, yet their bodies hung there like a macabre sculpture. The Magi were filled with such terror they too felt the madness to attack fill them, though the same terror kept their bodies from moving. The Leaf Shinobi lunged forward to subdue him, their hands going through signs, but the Dark Lord merely reached behind him and mentally grabbed them all before tossing them over his head and into the Magi, who by pure reactionary impulse caught them but fell in the process. The Dragonslayers were able to force down their fear just enough to stand and prepare ranged attacks. However, the Dark Lord would not allow that. With his palms down, he raised his arms to waist height, before flexing his fingers and sending out a massive wave of darkness. All were swept up in the wave and sent crashing into walls and buildings, some even breaking through them. "Your tenacity is admirable, but pointless," he roared, his demonic voice pierced their souls. "Submit. Give in to the one," he demanded. The Magi for the longest time did not move, their forms wreathed in pain. Fairy Tale OST, Seijai no Chikara. After a few moments Sauron watched, admittedly impressed, as Natsu pounded into the earth and began to force himself to his feet. "I will never give up," he gasped and groaned. "You threaten my comrades, my family. I'll die before I let you hurt them." At this, Magi and Shinobi alike looked at Natsu with wide eyes. To the Leaf members, the resemblance of him and their lost friend was uncanny. "You claim to seek the betterment of humanity. What about the man and women you just butchered?" he roared, shakily forcing him to his feet. Sauron's opinion of the young man increased more. It took a great deal to stand before him at his full power. Only Gil-galad and Elendil themselves had ever managed such a feat, yet here this young Dragonslayer not only was standing, but at his words, so too did the other Magi, and his former friends began to force themselves to their feet once more. He inspired them. Now Sauron understood the success they had in defeating his dark guilds. This unconquerable willpower was something that was intoxicating to those around him and encouraged them to be better themselves. "I do not fear you," he said with conviction, "because my friends stand by my side. And so do yours." At this, Sauron for a moment was shocked. "Do you know the pain that they felt when you were dead? They mourned you for all 7 years you were gone. And even now, as they stare at what you've become, they still fight to find the friend they once loved. And if we have to beat some sense into you to get that through your thick skull, we will." By the time he had finished, all the Magi and Shinobi stood, determination and conviction once again in their eyes. At this, Sauron gave a small chuckle. "You are truly a cut above the rest, Natsu Dragneel," he complimented. "It takes great strength and determination to inspire others the way you do." However, Fairy Tale OST, Makarov vs. Hades. At this moment, they felt a sudden blast of dark magic come to life behind them. "I was not talking to you," he said with menacing satisfaction. Magi and Shinobi turned in terror at the power emanation from behind them. They had little time to react as a dark wave of energy blasted them all forward, from Mirajane. When they were able to look up once more, Mirajane now stood in front of them in her Halfas form, in defense of the Dark Lord. "Mira! What's gotten into you?" roared Urza, horror on their faces. "I serve the Dark Lord," she said, her own demonic yet beautiful voice ringing out. The shock and bewilderment filled them. and though it normally wasn't his practice to reveal his methods, he knew this would crush them. All manner of foul and demonic creatures are of My dominion. Her body and mind have consumed so many demons that her very being is compelled to obey and serve the darkness, he told them, seeing the despair on their visages increase. Urza at this point, however, held no fear or despair, only rage. Fairy tale, purgatory armor. You dare, she said, her body shaking, to corrupt one of our comrades. Her body glowed for a moment before she now donned the infamous purgatory armor. You have crossed the line. I will destroy you. Her massive weapon crashed into the ground. Myra's powers formed and spun in her hands. Though she did not move as the Dark Lord only chuckled once more. You will find that hard to accomplish, trying to stay alive, he said in a low and dark tone. It was then that they heard something that made their hearts stop, and even more terror if possible. For the wind carried the sound of terrible wailing and howling. They looked to the night sky to see swarms of bats flying across the full moon before coming down onto the village and materialized into growling, snarling vampires. Werewolves barked and roared as they rushed into the city. The army of the night had come to protect their dark master, and to slaughter all in their path. Chapter 22, Saved from the Brink, the Prophecy Contested. Dracula Untold, The Brood. It was a massacre. Shinobi and civilian alike were feasted on by Sauron's beasts. The vampires' red eyes glowed hungrily as they fed. Werewolves ripped people apart, and all the while the Dark Lord stood there, arms crossed. From behind him walked Thuringwethil along with the corrupted Hinata. They were silent for the longest time, watching events unfold. Urza was desperate to attack him, however a dominated Mirajane was keeping her at bay. The other Magi and the Leaf Shinobi were busy trying to stay alive and keep others from falling victim to Sauron's bloodthirsty horde. Mira! Urza cried out, snap out of it please. She didn't respond, only send out another blast of energy that left a hole in the ground. Urza dashed around her and lunged toward the Dark Lord with her weapon raised, hoping the lack of connection would snap her out of it. However, Mira snapped in front of her, and kicked her back into the ground. Even to her siblings, Mira was out of reach, both of whom tried to stop her several times only to be swept aside as she continued to attack Scarlet. It was as if she had been given a task to attack her specifically. Meanwhile, the Shinobi and Magi were slowing, cutting through the horde of beasts. Fortunately, though the monsters healed quickly and were very capable of tearing them all apart, they were limited in number, and the speed and numbers of the Shinobi along with the wide-radiused powers of the Magi were able to whittle down their numbers. The Shadow stood there, his eyes appreciating the effectiveness of his creations. Despite their numbers and their numbers slowly dwindling, they slaughtered 10 for every one of them that fell. And every single one of them would die for their alpha. The battle was so fierce and bloody that it was almost too late before they noticed something that would make their blood freeze. Shadow of War OST, why do you keep fighting? The Dark Lord was making his way to the gates along with Mira, who was dragging an unconscious Urza, her armor shattered. Urza! Natsu yelled, fire emitted from his being, and he roasted the beasts around him, who yelped in pain. He rushed toward his friend, as did the rest of the Magi toward the Dark Lord. The Leaf Anbu saw it themselves and charged as well. In that moment, Freya and Hinata reappeared to strike at them. Freya's magic and Hinata's air palm sent shockwaves that blasted them back. Natsu, however, caught himself, and after sliding for a bit he charged forth again. Give us back our friends, he roared, flames engulfing his entire body as he flew toward the Shadow. At this, the Dark Lord finally stopped before the gate of Kumobakir and turned quickly the backhand the Dragon Slayer across the face with hellfire. He may have been a dragon slayer and the nephew of, and even feasted on the flames of the Hellfire Dragon, but he had never felt nor was he prepared for true primordial hellfire. Natsu! Lucy yelled as she rushed forward. Her magic was low from having summoned her spirits and utilizing her mimic technique to use similar weapons. The others were depleted of magic as well, and the Shinobi were exhausted from battling the Dark Lord bestial shock troops. Over time, the vampires had all been impaled or decapitated by the blades of Shinobi or torn apart by the Magi's spells. A few of the werewolves had fallen as well. The thing that had horrified them all, however, when it came to the werewolves and vampires, was that they were all human-looking. They were normal, wearing clothing, and looked nothing like the great alpha beast that had attacked the Leaf, but they still held pointed ears, the glowing assortment of eyes, and the blood-soaked fangs and claws. The Shinobi froze, however, the look on Hinata's face, it was so radically different. Sakura had seen the alternate world with Naruto, and she had seen their Hinata slowly transform into her doppelganger. She was used to seeing an aggressive and, on many occasions, shameless woman, even wearing clothing similar to her counterpart. She had let it slowly happen as she knew Hinata needed to become stronger. However, what she saw now was far worse than the woman she had become. Gone were her unique lavender eyes of the Hyuga clan, replaced by a solid and hellish glow, like the eyes of the corrupted kings of men when they accepted their rings. Her veins were still pulsing and evident, indicating she was using the Byakugan, but the veins were now darkened, as if black blood pulsed through them. And just above the valley of her breasts was the brand of the flaming eye. Hinata! Sakura gasped in horror. No. Neji fell to his knees seeing what had become of the fierce cousin he had grown to admire. Tell me something, boy, the Dark Lord said, a taunting emphasis upon the word boy. Do you still believe in the purity of the hearts of men? Hinata, Freya, and Mira, as if on telepathic command, stepped forward, Mira dropping Urza unceremoniously at the Dark Lord's feet. All walked in front of him in a protective wall. However, that was not what the Dark Lord's intent, but rather something far more cruel. His demonic voice like that of booming thunder, compelling all to listen. Shinobi, Magi, he declared, gaze upon the purest of you, corrupted by the darkness, turned into the most vicious of foes. Let this be a lesson to all who look to the sky with hope, that no man or woman can stand against the shadow alone. Their hearts sank as cruel smirks appeared on Hinata and Mirajane's faces, for they knew they did not have the heart nor conviction to attack them. At this, Sauron's armor began to glow red from the intense heat from his form. Then, before any could stop him, a massive wall of hellfire went rolling forth to consume them and reduce them to ash. Lotro St, the Odin King. However, in that moment of despair, a powerful booming voice challenged the Dark Lord, its power evident as a wall of light blocking the flaming from licking away at their flesh. So long as one person stands against you and your tyranny, there is always hope. They all turned to see that it was Gandalf the White, the Lady of Light, and the Lord of Imladris. The White Council had arrived. There was still the despair and pain, but now new feelings had appeared in contest: peace, happiness, and hope. They watched as the Lady of Light walked forward to stand between them and the shadow, the other two standing by her side. Vampires and werewolves alike whimpered and whined in pain as the purity of her power washed over them. Behind her walked the other two members of the White Council. No longer were they the wise old beings filled with kindness, now they were filled with a power that, although it was pure and holy, it was no less intimidating. They stood in defiance of the Dark Lord, who let out a soft growl. And 150, Shadow of War OST, The Fall. The White Council finally stands up from their seats, Sauron said maliciously. Tell me, when did the Vala decide to no longer turn a blind eye? In times past, the world knew who you were and united against you, Elrond said, his blade already in hand. Now we have returned to guide the people to unite against you once more. Sauron growled. Foolish elf, he barked out, do you not realize that the more you interact and manipulate, the more they will rely upon you? Shinobi and Magi alike could literally see the primordial magics whipping around them, a curving wall of light, dim yet visible, against the dark mists and tendrils that slowly crawled over each other and brushing against the wall, as if testing for weaknesses. It found none, yet. Tell me, Alarin, Sauron said, calling him by his true name, do you really believe that hope is so easily attained? That hope can hold back the darkness. Hope and light hold back the darkness, not through immense power, but through everyday kindness. That keeps the light in men's hearts. That is what defeats you before, and it will do so again. At this, Sauron said nothing. It was hard to get a read on the Dark Lord when his helm covered his head. Fool, he said, walking past his minions, kindness does not stop a wild beast from feasting upon the weak. When since the beginning of time has kindness stopped those who craved power? Against those that crave the destruction of the world? For the first time since this battle had begun, he summoned his dark mace, which engulfed itself in hellfire. Against me, he roared as he raised his mace, he brought against their defenses, and with a massive shockwave they broke, blasting black all from the shadow, whose cape flowed violently against the blast. By the time they recovered their sight, the Dark Lord's left hand glowed with hellfire, pulsing madly and condensed, ready to be unleashed. He pulled his arm back and prepared to thrust it forward. Begone! 050. However, the shadow was blasted back by a sudden compilation of powerful jutsu. His feet dragged against the ground before he finally came to a halt, his arms crossed over his face to block the attack. Lowering his arms, he growled menacingly. Turning, the Shinobi and Magi all looked to see something that not only raised their spirits, but raised their morale. The Jinachuriki had arrived with Natsumi leading the charge. They were a magnificent sight, where the Magi were masters of magic and powerful displays, these 9 were martial masters. Like deadly dancers they moved and flowed through the crowd of beasts and slew them with ease. Moving without need for command, Freya, Hinata, and Mirajane charged as well. Reinvigorated by the sudden rush of reinforcements, the Magi, Shinobi, and the White Council themselves entered the fray. Sauron once more chose to stay back and watch the conflict with fascination. It was incredible what simple moves on the board could do to turn the tide. All the while with a wicked grin hidden under his dark crowned helm. Within moments the vampires had been slain, their bodies shriveled and rotting the moment they were slain, and the werewolves lost their bestial features when they fell. All that held them back were the three women, yet even they were being forced back. 130. Enough, he declared, another wave of darkness blasting them all back, enveloping and passing the three women without harming them. Everyone else, however, were blasted back. I have wasted enough time with you, I have matters to attend to, he declared as the three women leapt back to his side. One person stepped forward, however. Farewell, heroes, he said, his power began to engulf himself and his pawns in flame. Natsumi summoned a nine-tails arm to grab them. Before in a sudden flash of flame, he was gone. Ba Sing Se. The Avatar and his friends were deep in thought, having managed to infiltrate the last stronghold in the Earth Kingdom against the Fire Nation and the Dark Lord's forces. For those in the outer city, terror always filled their hearts, for day and night they heard the dark chant of the dark armies. Goragoda and Uruk Captain would roar to begin to hellish chant. Upon hearing the words of black speech, the armies of Sauron would respond. Kat Muda. Death to men, they would roar, only for the captain to roar back Garash. Louder. Kat Muda. Garash. Katmuda. All the while terrible drums crashed, like booming thunder announcing the doom of men. Day in day out as they heard the walls smashed by hundreds of artillery pieces. It was only by the power of the earthbenders that the walls were intact, but by the end of every assault they were exhausted. The bloodlust among Sauron's forces was starting to get to them though. It was only by their discipline and the power of their superiors that they didn't hack into their own Fire Nation allies. They had swept across the Earth Kingdom like the Black Plague, utterly destroying every form of opposition since Omashu. The Earth Kingdom warriors were formidable, however they paled in comparison to the martial skill and might of Gondor. They relied too much on their benders and did not put true discipline into their other forces. Only the firebenders seemed to have a semblance of the strength Gondor once had. And they served the Fire Lord. Aang and his friends went pale as they saw the black and red armored ocean of enemies just waiting for a single crack in their defenses. The thing that made them truly go pale, however, was at the very front, the four horsemen astride their fearsome horses. The hammer, the tower, the mouth, and the wraith. All stared motionless as the flaming boulders smashed and crashed into the walls. In the far back, they could see siege towers being formed. It would not be long now before they would be face to face with ravenous and ruthless orcs and Uruk-hai. I can't believe it's come to this, Katara said, her eyes watering as she saw the terror that the people of the outer wall were living in. Aang once again was incredibly thankful for their savior from the heavens, thinking back on their encounter. Flashback in the skies above the Earth Kingdom. The angelic being, Ianwi he had called himself, was tending to a very pale and weak Katara. The Morgul blade that had pierced her side had left a shard when pulled out. Sokka cursed Azula and her companions for harming his sister, and himself for not being able to protect her. A gentle glow was seen from the being's hand, similar to when Katara uses her healing water. Slowly the sweating and fever she was feeling subsided, and she drifted into dreamless sleep. She will be okay now, I have stopped the Morgul shard from reaching her heart, he told the others who sighed in relief. Wait, you said your name is Ianwi, but who are you? Aang asked. The banner carrier of Manwë turned to him and sat against the side of Appa's saddle. It will be difficult for you to understand completely who and what I am, he explained, no manner of insult implied in his words. The best way I can explain to you in our brief time together is that I am the captain of the Holy Guard. The god's emissary and warrior, if you will. At this Sokka had a comical freak out, his jaw dropping to the floor in shock and disbelief. Though after he saw this being with the wings of light and the holy magic, he couldn't argue the fact. But that did not stop him from muttering unintelligible sounds as he tried to wrap his head around what he had just been told. Aang, who had lived among a very spiritual culture, was less shocked, but by no means was he prepared for what he had just been told. His eyes went wide. An angelic warrior was here before him, and had just helped him save his friends. Why did you help us? He asked, and more importantly, what brings you here? After a moment Ianwi spoke. To answer your question, your friend was suffering from an affliction that none of this time can cure. Had I not intervened, she would have become a dark and twisted version of herself, bound to the Dark Lord's will. At that, this Aang and Sokka went pale, picturing Katara with the same hellish eyes that Azula and her companions possessed, her skin pale and a wicked grin upon her face. As to the second question, it is because of the Dark Lord that I am here. The Vala, or gods to put it simply, require proof that his threat is great enough. And if it is, to destroy him and his forces. At this Aang grew angry. Proof, he roared, he has tormented and destroyed near all of the bending nations. The North Water tribe barely stands, Earth has been nearly destroyed, and my own people are nothing but bone. Only Ba Sing Se and the North capital still stand. At this Ian we frowned. You must understand something, young Avatar, he began. The last time the Vala took action in the mortal plane, the lands of Arda were torn apart, and the last time the father of all acted, an entire civilization was erased from this world. At this, Sokka and Aang once again went pale. The idea of such destruction capable, it was no wonder they were hesitant to act. Mankind has vanquished the shadow before. I am sent to ascertain whether they can again. Ian, we finished, and if so, I have been tasked with vanquishing him, so as to avoid the end. Is Sauron so terrible? Aang asked. My former selves have said he is my true enemy, but they have said nothing as to what he has done. Ianwe's face darkened at this. Sauron has tormented this world since before the First Age. He corrupted and dominated entire civilizations, and orchestrated the destruction of many more. That is why we must stop him. At this he stood. You must travel to Ba Sing Se, warn them and help them in defense against the shadow. At this his wings of light returned to his form and his replaced his helm on his head. His face vanishing beneath the helm. You may have been created by the bright Lord, he spoke, his voice angelic and powerful, but your choices are your own. And with that he took off into the sky, flying west, toward the hidden Shinobi lands. End flashback. And so Aang did as asked, though he could not help but wonder what he could do. The armies were massive, their only hope was to either attack and fight their way through, or to find a way to retreat and flee the city. Sitting around was going to do nothing, as there was no one to rescue them. We have to get word to the Earth King of Ba Sing Se, Aang said to the others. The Dark Lord and his minions will break through given enough time. Then let's get to work. Katara said with a smile, cracking her knuckles. All the while, a pair of firebenders found themselves wandering through the same streets of Ba Sing Se. In the wilderness, Sasuke and his team sat quietly in front of the fire. Each and every one of them possessed a grim visage. They now knew of the powers that they stood between. What are we gonna do, man? Suigetsu said. There ain't no way we get out of this unscathed. There is if we get that sword, Karen said to her aquatic team member. Yugo in this moment looked at her with a contemplating look. You seem to know an awful lot about him and the old stories, he told her. Karen looked into the fire as her eyes glazed over, thinking on her memories. When I was passed around as a blood bag, the only thing I could do was lose myself into the old stories. They grew sober at that. All of them knew what she had suffered through when she was a child. I read every bit of those stories when I was a child, the adventures, the trials, the dragons and demons that the heroes had to face, she told them. Can you tell us about this sword? Sasuke finally spoke up, though his eyes did not leave the flame, picturing the flames taking shape for the words she spoke. It only appears in a few moments of the story, she told him. Though other tales speak of a mighty sword, it always had spoke as the sword of kings. At this the ego of Sasuke grew. Wielding such a blade would certainly give him power. Karen continued, it is said that it is the only weapon that Sauron fears. With a broken blade it cut off Sauron's ring. Only the rightful High King could wield the blade, she continued. Those who wielded the blade were wise and powerful, and the blade itself wielded the strength to level armies. The others' eyes widened at the thought of such a powerful blade. They knew of many a shinobi that could tear armies apart. Sasuke himself took on 1,000 men and left them alive yet broken. If he were to find such a weapon, then none could stop them. His anticipation of such power made his Uchiha eyes flare on their own accord, visualizing a great flaming blade turning armies to ash. He needed such a blade. With it he could achieve his own ambitions, and not even a legend like Madara or whoever that ghost was could stop him. The ghost? Karen, he spoke again. She blushed for a moment hearing her name on his lips, but his next question made her ponder. Do you know of any other being able to match such a blade themselves? At this she too looked at the fire which reflected off her sunglasses. According to the old stories, only a few ever managed to stand against him, for a time. Who? He asked. According to the legends, she began, only the High King of Man Elendil and the High King of Elves Gilgalad were able to truly battle the Dark Lord to a standstill at his full might. With kingly elven spear and Numenorian sword, they challenged him, their weapons capable of harming both angelic and demonic beings. They were beings beyond us in every way, powerful and strong. Many wounds that would kill us outright they could simply shrug off and continue the fight. However, even they were no match, she said sadly. Gil-galad was burnt to a husk by Sauron's mere touch, and Elendil's body was broken by his mace. It was only by their martial skill and eventual sacrifice that they were able to weaken Sauron long enough that his reaction was too slow for the King of Man's heir to cut the ring from his finger. Sasuke thought on this, and the ghost, judging by the quiver and sword on his back, he guessed this was not him. Who else? He asked. At this, Karen. I don't know if it's true, but there are tales of an elven lord that challenged the Dark Lord, nearly defeating him on many an occasion. In the end, however, he was slain by the Dark Lord, but due to a curse and his own refusal to move on, he later bonded with a human warrior. They were known as the Grave Walker, as when they were cut down, they would soon return to the mortal realm once more. At this, Sasuke imagined Orochimaru's thoughts were he still alive, though they were better known by the elves' moniker, the Bright Lord. At this they all grew silent a moment, till Suigetsu voiced his thoughts. A little on the nose, don't you think? She shrugged. Maybe, but the tale says the elf abandoned his host before being defeated yet again. Though the man somehow lived on and held back Sauron's forces for decades as the Dark Ranger. Sasuke thought on all this, the description and the intense hatred for Sauron fit who he was dealing with. His Sharingan caught a shadow moving in the darkness. The tales are true, he told them. They all looked at him in surprise. The behind Madara, is this Bright Lord? I saw him with my Sharingan, speaking to Madara. At this the others went pale. They now knew, the Dark Lord and the Bright Lord were the ones who had made their own a battleground. At this realization Sasuke stood. Get some rest, we have a long time ahead of us. Before they could say anything, he vanished into the darkness, leaving them to their thoughts. He walked for a long time, going through the real turmoil of his heart. His one and only true friend was the vilest and evil being in history. It was in that moment he heard a wolven howl, though it sounded deeper, louder, and more monstrous. He looked up to a cliff just about 40 feet above him to see a massive wolf, something that shouldn't be possible. He listened to its deep and dark growling breath as a pair of glowing flaming eyes glared right back at him. The large wolf then leapt from its perch with such speed it was a blur. However, when it landed it was no longer a beast, but a man. He wore tattered clothes. Back in Sauron's cell, both the interrogation unit as well as the script Magi were coming over every inch of the barriers and chains. Even a few Hyuga clan members were assisting with their keen eyesight. How could he have broken out of these chains? Asked Dave, slamming his one hand into the wall making cracks. The whole room shook and quivered, already having taken a beating from Sauron's assault. We are looking for answers now, Lord Rakage, one of the IT members said. At this he went to strike again, but Tsunade's own strength stopped him. Enough, she said before walking forward. Damaging the room will only make it worse. We need to find out how he broke loose, and what he did to Hinata and Mirajane. Not to mention the fact that we have an army of Madara's forces somewhere out there we still need to worry about, that Sasuke stated. We have been too distracted by having Sauron in our midst, we lost sight of the war. And yet, he helped us a great deal, Tsunade said in puzzlement. Why? Weakening the opponent, said a familiar voice. They turned to see the White Council having arrived. Gandalf continued, a war on two fronts is impractical. He seeks to weaken and eliminated threats. But how did he escape? A growled, Galadriel slowly walked forward and ran her hands along with chains. The primordial magic was used, she said softly. To the Magi who had heard this being said went pale. Hades and the other dark guilds had been looking for such magic. And now they were facing it. And these seals, one of the Sand Seal Masters spoke up, some of them were there to make the chains and other seal matrices useless. He was in simple chains that he could have broken at any time. That explains his calm demeanor, that Sasuke growled. I had a feeling something was wrong. Are you saying what I think you are? May asked her constituents. The others exchanged grim looks. We have a traitor in our midst, Tsunade said with venom in her voice. Everyone took time to contemplate this, before going their separate ways to think on this. Tsunade however looked to Kakashi. Where is Natsumi? I will search for her, he said before vanishing. At this Tsunade walked away. Where are you going? May asked her fellow Kage. To see our newest guest, she said before slamming a door open to see a woman chained with seals she and the White Council saw too personally. She was just thankful that Natsumi managed to grab one of them, and that it was one she could hurt. Alright bitch, she growled, time for you to tell me everything I need to know. A high-pitched demonic giggle was heard as Freya looked up, her eyes glowing crimson. Oh, she said with excitement, and are you going to do old hag? With a growl, she cracked her knuckles, I plan to make you suffer. She then grabbed the vampiress by the hair and made her stare into her furious hazel eyes, until, and after, you tell me what happened to my Naruto, and what I have to do to get him back. Cliffs of lightning. Heights, that was one of the things that never frightened her. Naruto would take her up to the Hokage monument when they were young, it was a safe place from the pain and suffering they experienced down in the village. In the moments she really needed to do some thinking. All that had happened was overwhelming her. Thought I might find you here. She turned to see the old toad she and Naruto trained under in the sage arts. What is going on? She looked at him as the toad hopped to her side. The elder says the time has come. He looked up at her. The moment has come, when the fate of the world will be decided. What do you mean? She asked, before her eyes widened. Wait, that was for Naruto, not me. We don't know that, he said solemnly and sadly. You trained under Jiraiya as well. And with the path he has traveled, you are the only one who can contend with him for the fate of all creation. Her eyes widened. What are you saying? With a grim expression he looked to the skies. At that same time, the Dark Lord stood at the walls of Ba Sing Se, his forces shouting in unison. They battered their weapons, their shields with their weapons. They roared and snarled bestially. The warriors of Ba Sing Se could only stare down in fear as the Dark Lord stood there, looking upon the gates with his arms folded. In the winds of war his black tattered cloak waved and whipped as the very ground beneath him scorched and blackened. I'm saying that the prophecy of the Chosen One has passed on to you. Or else the man who was once your brother is going to destroy this world. Chapter 23, Traitors and Infiltrators, Fall of Ba Sing Se. And, hello everyone, just want to ask that you check out the and I'll have below, enjoy the chapter. Middle-earth Shadow of War, Tribe Song Medley. Night had fallen upon Ba Sing Se and the siege which threatened it. Within the camps of the attackers, those who were not manning the siege weapons were relaxing around the fires. The orc and fire soldiers were laughing and cheering. The orc folk taught them their shanties and clashing drinks with their allies as they laughed. The fire legions had to admit that when they weren't getting bloodthirsty for battle, they were at the very least tolerant company. But they could be sociable and even entertaining. Even the beautiful vampires danced to the drums by the fire, for they did not feed on their allies. In fact, they entertained them. When they and their werewolf counterparts weren't fierce monsters, they were similar to people. Firebenders manipulated the flames, creating beasts and other forms to entertain their compatriots. On and on they sang the shanties with each other, the Uruks and Alegs laughing at the men who tried the grog only for his to hit them so hard they stumbled and fell into each other or toppled back over their chairs. Suddenly silence came over as the Fire Lord and her guard walked among the camp upon horses. At this fire soldier and Uruk alike stood in respect to the mortal emissaries of the Dark Lord. Their eyes every once in a while glowed with fire, as if the Dark Lord himself saw through them. They rode until they came to a hill where the Dark Lord stood, analyzing the walls and strategizing their entry. He knew of the way people inside knew not of his forces, and it sickened him at the weakness men had stooped to in these lands. Azula and her entourage dismounted before walking forward to see a dark-haired woman standing beside him as well as the hammer, mouth, and tower. They stopped just close enough to hear them speak. What do you see? Sauron asked the woman. Veins around her clear eyes became more pronounced as she stared at everything in and beyond the walls. The walls are thick, far thicker than any I have witnessed in the Shinobi nations, Hinata answered. However, beyond the walls they hold no defenses until the inner city. They are fodder meant to save the higher-class citizens. Sauron nods at her assessment as the demoness returns, her angelic wings fold onto her back. The Dark Lord turned to her. Did you find it? He asked her. She dropped to her knee and spoke. I did indeed, master, Mirajane nodded, not moving from her place. Sauron nodded before turning to see his arrivals. He was not interested in speaking long. You are aware of your task, they nodded. Good, when the attack is made, move to the location Mirajane provides you. This will draw all eyes away from you, Sauron told them. You only have one opportunity, do not fail me. At this Azula spoke clearly, I will not, my lord. She looks upon the other two women. She had yet to see a demon within her master's thralls, yet she was not surprised. The other, she could not decipher, however she held the mark of the one on her bosom, therefore she was an ally. Ty Lee, being the ball of energy she was, leapt forward to greet them. Hi. Hinata is surprised for a moment at such a bubbly member in their ranks, though she composes herself. As Hinata introduces herself, Azula made an internal decision to make something clear with her. "Let me make something clear," she glared. "You dare try to betray him, and I'll burn you to a crisp." At this the feisty side of Hinata returned. "Try, and I'll sever your nervous system." The two women glared at one another before they heard the sudden voice of their master, but they stopped when they felt Sauron's heated gaze. They turned to see his head had to turn to the side to glare at them. He was not amused. Suddenly Azula realized something was missing. "My lord, where is Our Lady?" she asked, "and Lord Angmar?" Sauron turned back to the walls. "She is fulfilling her task," he told them, "as is Angmar. Go and prepare yourselves," he told them, "do not fail me." They all bowed and turned to return to their tents. Meanwhile Sauron turned his thoughts toward the Witch King, winds whipping through his robes and as he rode his drake, heading west. As the sun rose upon the next day Sauron made his move, begin the assault. Top of the wall. Aang and his team watched in horror as a massive drill covered by fire tanks. Standing atop it stood the hammer, his mace upon his shoulder, he was smiling, happy to be within a true war once again. "We have to act," Aang said as he prepared to leap over the edge, only to be grabbed by Sokka. "Hold on Aang, we need a plan," he scolded him. "You go down there without a plan and he'll crack your head open like an egg." "Then what do you suggest?" Aang asked him. Sokka soon gave him a grin. "Here's what you're gonna do," he began. "On the drill epic score, give 'em hell." The hammer watched as Aang crashed on top of the drill a few feet away from him. "We meet again, boy," he said, putting emphasis in order to degrade the avatar, "here to save your precious people? The ones you abandoned long ago?" Aang ignored this, opting to make a declaration. "Your master's reign of tyranny ends now." He pointed his battle staff at the man, who merely chuckled at the bravado. "Delusional boy," he spat, "his reign hasn't even begun, and a pathetic child like you shall not stop him, just like you couldn't stop us from decapitating your old friend." Aang grit his teeth, keeping himself from charging wildly again. At the same time Katara appeared by his side. "You will pay for all you have done." Aang looked to his side to see the blazing rage in her eyes. The hammer saw it too. "Ah," he said with satisfaction, "now those are the eyes of a warrior. Perhaps this may amuse me after all." All the while Sokka and Toph snuck onto the drill and proceeded to subdue the engineers within the drill. The hammer took no notice as he was focused on only one thing, war. Within the next few moments, Sauron and Aang glared at one another, one with a battle-hungry grin, the other with an aggressive and convicted appearance. Neither being would back down. Then all three of them moved. Aang summoned wind in an artistic and dance-like appearance. Katara waved her arms elegantly and summoned water from her flasks. The air he bent held enough concussive force to incapacitate any man, and Katara's water could snap limbs and render flesh from bone. However, the hammer of Sauron was no mere man. The hammer simply tanked the blast before charging forward with his mace. The two barely dodged the mace crashing into the ground as he spins and turns to smack him across the head. Though it seemed to merely knock him back before he was upon them once more. Katara leapt forward and summoned blast of water to keep him at bay. Spinning out of the torrent he swings his mace to smash her as Aang jumped forth to kick him in the chest, knocking him back. As the clash continued, Toph and Sokka began to tear the drill apart from the inside. Though in truth the battle atop the drill is damaging it as well. What the hell is wrong with that guy? It's as if he doesn't care about the drill at all. Sokka said as sweat covered his brow. "It doesn't matter." Toph shouted, "If anything that means it's to our advantage." Outside the battle had come to a halt. The hammer decided to taunt some more. "Do you really think that you possess the strength to stand against my master?" The others were silent for a moment to catch their breath as the hammer seemed to be an unstoppable force. Every attack they sent at him only seemed to unbalance him but never harm him, then he would be on them again. The hammer continued. "I merely represent a portion of his might. If you cannot defeat me, what hope do you have against the one?" he asked them with a grin. And gulped down a few more breaths before responding, "I will fulfill my duty, and defend the elemental nations from you and any others who would impose tyranny." Katara smiled at her friend's brave words, however the hammer shook his head and grunted in disappointment. "Spoken like a true fool, just like the rest of your people. Up in the clouds along with your ideals only possible in fantasy." Then he said the thing that pushed Aang over the edge. No wonder they were wiped out by the Fire Nation. Aang grows enraged and unintentionally activates the Avatar state and tosses massive boulders at the hammer. He crushes them with his mace, but is surprised when an enraged avatar appears behind the last boulder with an earth-covered fist and punches him off of the drill. In that moment the drill began to overload and Aang was grabbed by his friends, and with the help of Toph's bending they fled back over the wall. After a moment of checking on Aang, they had a brief moment to celebrate. The ends, however, as the hammer walks out of the explosion, brushing off ash and stopping at the feet of his master. "It is done, master, just as you asked," he said with a grin. Sauron nods. "Excellent," he praised. "That should have given enough time for Azula and her companions to infiltrate the city. Now we merely have to wait for the signal." As he spoke those words, Azula and her friends in their disguises knelt before the Earth King. Shinobi lands. Tsunade's hands healed once again after another session of venting her frustrations with Thuringwethil. All she was getting were taunts and cryptic answers, which ended her beating the vampiress even more. She was beyond angry at not getting any answers. But she couldn't dwell on that anger in this moment. She had to meet with the others, and despite how much she loved Naruto, she could not allow him to go unchecked. She had to admit that after seeing the aftermath of his carnage and escape, for a brief moment she wondered if he was really in there somewhere. Casting those thoughts to the side, she walked into the main council chamber where her fellow Kage, the two wizard saints, and the White Council all waited her. "Judging by your face, Lady Tsunade, I gather she revealed nothing that Sasuke asked her." She shook her head. "Just more cryptic nonsense," she said behind grit teeth, "nothing of real use." At this, I made a decision. Be that as it may, we need to send Shinobi to deal with Sauron and his minions before they can come here and attack us in full force. At this, May added, "We must not forget that we have a war we need to finish as well." At this, Gaara nodded and added to her statement. "With only the clones and a few more reanimations left, Madara has gone to ground for the moment, leaving them to use hit and run tactics until he had reassembled his forces. I gather he and this bright lord were not counting on his old nemesis to enter the fray." "This is true," Jirai admitted. "In a way we should be thankful that Sauron joined the battle on our side. Though I fear this is only the beginning of their quarrel. He used us to weaken his opponent while his forces are gathering elsewhere." "What are you saying, Lord Jura?" asked Mifune, "that perhaps Sauron has an army of his own?" "There can be no doubt of this." The others turned to see Gandalf sitting on a chair, his staff leaning on him and his eyes to the ground. For a moment they saw the age in his eyes. The weariness of facing this old and seemingly indomitable foe was clear on his face for but a moment before it was gone, and his critical strategic mind was brought into play once more. "Sauron has always possessed military might, and these days are no different," he told them. "According to reports, orc raiding parties are already attacking travelers and caravans. While most have not left a trace, the carnage they leave is something only orcs would do. Not to mention the fact that my ANBU ran into a raiding party and stopped them," Tsunade told the group, "so we know they are out there. The question is, where is the main force?" At this the Yuzukage spoke. "Perhaps then we should send that unit to uncover the location of his forces while the rest of us focus upon combating Madara and Celebrimbor." "Himura is right," Mifune told the others. "This is the best option to observe the enemy and keep the Ninetales well away from Madara." As everyone began to mull this over, Makarov let out a growl. "Whatever we decide, we must do it quickly," he snarled. "I will not allow my family to be corrupted by that monster. I shall tear him apart if I must. Many have tried, and failed." Gandalf rose from his seat. "Such measures will not be enough against the Dark Lord. Tsunade, you need to realize that he has not been the boy you knew since before time began. The part of him that you knew is gone. Only the shadow remains." At this, Tsunade marched right up to the White Wizard. "You're wrong," she said, half angry, half desperate. "I saw his face, he's still in there behind that blackened exterior." Mifune then spoke up. "Regardless, we need to do something. We know they have a history, but sending your ANBU may be the best option to subdue him. It may also be best to send the Ninetales Jinchuriki to apprehend him as well. She may be the only one with the chance to match him in physical power, not to mention the face that the Magi are capable of creating massive attack spells in an instant." At this she turned and bellowed with a chakra-enhanced voice, "ANBU. In that instant her own special forces, including Natsumi. What would you have of us, Lady Tsunade?" "You're heading across the ocean in search of the shadow," she declared. At this they flinched though said nothing. "Inform the Magi that they will be joining you. We will deal with Madara and his forces from here, but we cannot win with two enemies out there. Your mission should be clear," she continued, leaving the unspoken part to them, though they knew what she meant. "But you need to assess the enemy and, if possible, delay them as best you can in order for us to handle Madara and his remaining forces." At this, Gaara stepped forward. "This is a rescue and recon mission. If you can also find allies, then call them to our cause. We need every bit of help we can get." They nodded and in that instant vanished, departing to inform the Magi and head for the docks. Jura turned to the group. "I shall lead the Magi. If they face him again, they will need my help." With a nod from Makarov, the fourth of the wizard saints departed. At this the council turned back to the battle maps and where to find the remainder of Madara's forces. Hours went by, the sun crawled toward the horizon. Continue. 3 men walked in, 2 seal masters, one from the leaf, the other the sand, and the one leading them was a very grim Kakashi. "My lady, may I have a word in private?" he said with a frighteningly calm voice, though Tsunade could hear the edge in his voice. Walking over to him and the others, they spoke with low tones. "What is it, Kakashi?" "We've identified the cause of the nullification seals," he said grimly, "and the culprit." At this Tsunade understood the quiet tone. It meant it was someone in this room. All the others were suddenly shocked to witness Tsunade delivering an enhanced punch across the Yuzuki's face. "Traitor," she roared, her rage and frustration getting the best of her. "What's gotten into you?" I shouted. However, given her scream they had a hint. Kakashi answered for the enraged Tsunade. "Our sealing masters revealed that he was the one who had made the nullification seals. He and his people are with him," Kakashi stated, still unable to name his former student with either name. The Mizukage and the samurai lord stepped forward, ready to attack, though they halted when the Yuzukage shook his head from the blow and drew his blade with a chuckle. "Clever girl, you've been watching us for a long time, haven't you?" "I've had Kakashi keep an eye on them ever since they appeared and called the Kage Summit. I just needed proof, and for him and his people to make a mistake," she growled, cracking her knuckles. She stopped however as the Yuzukage chuckled again. "It was only a matter of time," he said, but he raised a hand. "But that won't stop us," he roared before slamming a smoke bomb down to the ground. Holding their breaths, they rushed outside after the man. As they ran they could hear violence and battle occurring outside. They many dead as the Yuzukage managed to cut through guards. His carnage however was halted as before him slammed the Jinchuriki, creating a dust cloud. Himura turned to see them and lowered his blade and removed himself from a battle stance as the dust cleared. Knife in the dark. Kneeling into the impact, their heads down, their eyes closed. The Kage grinned knowing they had him trapped. Tsunade growled out, "It's over, traitor, tell us what he's planned." Tens of shinobi appeared, though no samurai, who were performing as frontline warriors and now hunting down Zetsu clones. At hearing this however, Himura turned toward them and sheathed his blade. "You think this is over? My dear Tsunade, you still don't see the truth of your situation. The shadow is everywhere, and you didn't even know it." In that moment, the sun vanished behind the mountains, ominous mist of green and black. "Perhaps now, you will understand your folly," he told them. "You stand against the last of the Maelstrom's shadows, Himura Uzumaki." At this they all went pale, not by his name, but by the title. During the time of the Maelstrom village, there had been 4 Kage, however, when the village was wiped out, there had been a tale of a man who took up the blood-soaked hat of the Yuzukage and led his people into battle. His skill in battle and with a blade was so great he slew thousands alone. He led the military forces into a final stand so that his people could scatter into the wind. It was said his eyes were fiercer than Madara Uchiha's, for while they did not hold any jutsu, they did promise one thing, death. In his last stand he and his warriors faced an army 3 times its size and cut down a third of them before the last of them fell, the Yuzukage himself, multiple weapons protruding his form. He was gifted by his enemies with the title of Last of the Maelstrom's Shadows. But if he was truly here standing before them, then that means, "Yes, Tsuchikage," he told a shocked old man on the verge of a heart attack, "your past has returned to haunt you. And the tides of darkness rise against you all." In that moment the Jinchuriki's bodies began to emit a dark mist that flowed from their forms. "Are they about to transform?" Anoki said with a shock and fear. "If they all did it would level the city." However, something far more frightening was occurring. A tailed beast cloak was red. This was pitch black. In horror they watched as they took the form of armored and hooded beings. Their rings glowed menacingly as their faces vanished from the mortal realm, leaving a frighteningly empty shadow beneath their hood, which were then covered by menacing and unique metal masks. They walked past the Yuzukage, and within that moment Magi and Shinobi finally realized just how outmatched they were. High above their heads they heard the bone-chilling cry, a sound that filled the Shinobi with fear, and the White Council with dread. For in a massive of shadow, slamming down in front of the Yuzukage and between his fellows, stood the Witch King of Angmar. He reached across his waist and drew his blade, the Sword of Terror. "The Dark Lord calls you to his service, kings of men." Horror filled all as their heroes, the Jinchuruki of the allied shinobi, revealed themselves as the fallen kings of men, the Nazgul. Drawing their own Morgul blades, they responded in unison, their own haunting voices, those of the Jinchuruki in unison with that of the Nazgul. "We answer his call," they growled out. Moments passed as the Kage and Makarov stared in disbelief. "This can't be," muttered the Tsuchikage. In mad fear, the shinobi attacked. However, these were no simple servants of Sauron, these were the 9 fierce warriors of a time long past, serving the shadow for thousands of years. Their blade work alone was enough to fend off and slay their prey. It was in this moment the Kage knew they needed to act, for alongside the Nazgul attacked the Yuzu shinobi, their masterful blade work and black clothing and armor making them appear as wraith-like minions of the Nazgul. Their Trithan gauntlets allowed them to catch and break blades as they dealt the killing blow. Their black armor in this cursed darkness made it very difficult to properly see them. The Nazgul were unmatched, dozens fell before their blades. After every kill, they turned back to the Kage and White Council, as if to challenge them. A challenge they had no choice but to take head-on. Charging in first, the Kages outmatched the Yuzu shinobi and charged straight for the Nazgul, who raised their weapons to the new challengers. Snarled the Raikage, "Snap out of it." His words to reach his brother fell on deaf ears as the Nazgul that was once his brother was silent. The Mask of Helm Hammerhand stared back at the Raikage before headbutting him and advancing on him once more, foregoing a blade and utilizing his own fists to brawl the Raikage in a match of sheer power. It seemed things would not end well had the White Council not interfered. With the power of the Kages, they were able to face off against the Nazgul. However, this was very different from the duel atop Dol Guldur. Like their master, their full strength had returned as well. With the might of the Nazgul once more at their peak, they utilized both their dark powers and their skills with a blade to fend off their opponents. Now they were proving just how mighty they were. The Witch King and the Dark Ranger went blow for blow with Gandalf and Makarov, while the 2 Lady Nazgul battled the Lady Galadriel. Suladin dueled Elrond and Mifune with perfect bladework, and Kamul used his dominion of the Eastern Sands to keep the Kage off balance as he now fought Temari and Kankuro. Battling the Nazgul, they found they could not land a hit as their millennia of battle experience, their very presence as Nazgul, and the Black Breath slowed them down immensely. Temari and Kankuro begged for their brother to snap out of it. However, Kamul only formed sand spikes and thrust them at the 2 before charging forward with his sword. The rest of the Nazgul battled the Kage and were far too fast even to land a significant blow. They moved quickly and utilized their powers of sorcery and wraith nature, making it difficult for even beings of pure and holy power such as Gandalf and Makarov to deal with them. Shadow of War OST, The Fall. Deeming this the end of the battle, the Witch King summoned his own power, blasting back the White Council and immobilizing the Kage, forcing them to their knees. He slowly began to dominate their minds, their eyes changing to flaming yellow and red. The Nazgul walk up behind him and await his completion. Sauron's victory was nearly assured in the Hidden Nations. The White Council and Makarov struggled to their feet in an effort to stop him. However, 2 other figures appeared to challenge the Nazgul. Their eyes went wide as Ianwi entered the fray, accompanied by perhaps the only woman who ever stood a chance against the Nazgul, the Blade of Galadriel, Tauriel. With his golden spear and his prowess in battle outmatched even the Nazgul, and with the help of the hooded woman with blades leapt out from the shadows and engaged the Nazgul with the angelic warrior. Her own skills were impressive, and she seemed to know their tactics and attacked accordingly, while Ianwi's own mastery was well displayed. It was not long before the Nazguls were forced to retreat into the shadows of the Wraith world and then back to their master. Though not without a malicious statement. "Your interference only delays the inevitable," banner carrier, Angmar snarled. "The Dark Lord will take great pleasure in breaking you himself." End OST. After a moment, the Kage shake themselves from the near domination and looked to their saviors. Now with a proper look they could take them in, one tall and powerful like Sauron but with angelic armor and wings of light that soon vanished into his back. The other turned out to be none other than the Blade of Galadriel, the ring of Celebrimbor on her ethereal finger. Ba Sing Se, Lotro OST, Siege of Gondor. Things had fallen apart quickly. With promises of coming home, along with the death of the former Fire Lord, Zuko joined Azula. Red and blue flames lashed out against the Avatar and his companions, who tried desperately to hold back or avoid the flames. Aang utilized crystal armor to tank the flames while Katara utilized her water bending to extinguish the flames and counterattack. Aang's tactic was working rather well as his armored and up-close approach kept Azula on her heels. At the same time as their duel, the Dai Li had ordered an emergency change of the guard on the wall, leaving the wall unguarded and without repairing earthbenders. 412. It was in this moment, with the shrieking cries of the Nazgul high in the air, that Sauron made his move. "Begin," he said plainly, watching on as the Uruk roared, launching flaming catapults high over the walls, bringing the chaos of war to the people of Ba Sing Se. Siege weapons made their move to the high walls and release hordes of orcfolk and fire legionnaires. Sauron himself stepped forward as well, his metallic steps drowned out by the cheers and chants of the Uruk and Olig forces chanting the One Ring poem. Drums and shields were hammered as the blood frenzy began to take over even the fire legions. Surprised by the sudden attack, they were unprepared for the flaming artillery and the torrents of orcs that rushed over the walls. The Earth soldiers rushed to their posts in order to hold back the chaos, however they were outnumbered and quickly overrun. Earthbenders took out numerous orcs, but the vampires and werewolves were unleashed, and with their increased speed and ferocity they were able to feast on them. Summoning his mace, he gripped it tight as hellfire began to cover the head. Letting out a deep growl, he reared back and crashed the mace against the gate. Inside the gate, Shanzhou was one of the lucky ones. He hadn't been hit by the fire or by the debris. He and his fellow soldiers rushed to the gate as the guards up top sent orders to defend the gate. Hundreds of soldiers prepared their weapons as benders create barriers and low walls for the soldiers to defend themselves. This was perhaps the only thing that saved many of them from the gate of Ba Sing Se destroying them, sending out millions of small and large debris. The front rows were able to hide behind the bending wall, but those in the back were less lucky. All Zhou and the other survivors of the blast could see was the Titanic armored being standing in the now empty archway. Taller beings tower over him, their forms bulkier and more monstrous. The Dark Lord said nothing as a fire grag rushed forward, spewing out molten lava as it did. Behind it charged the battle-armored Olighai and the remainder of his forces. With vicious roars they charged past their master, breaking the ranks of the enemy, allowing werewolves to lead the charge as Uruk and fire soldiers charged forward behind them. Those who were ventured too far away were torn apart from vampires appearing from the shadows. Alongside the werewolves, wargs and direwolves rushed through the ranks and past the soldiers to hunt more prey. The Earth warriors gave it their all, however, and cut down their fair share of the enemy. But the viciousness they faced was such that an Uruk would drop his weapon and with powerful, metal-spiked blows they'd pummel their foe or rip them apart with their vicious fangs. The last thing Zhao saw before his own life ended was the blade of an Uruk coming down on him. Sauron looked deep upon the chaos of war with a calm demeanor. He looked into the sky to see his Nazgul on their fire drakes, creating chaos and burning people and buildings with wraith and cursed drake fire. The hammer, tower, and mouth led the army through the streets, tearing down any and all they found. In that moment, he vanished in a ball of flame, leaving his minions to take the outer city. Aang was darting around, competing and battling with the fire and stone benders, within his diamond armor striking at the Dai Li and the fire siblings during a moment that Katara and the others were recovering from their own wounds. His armor is too strong to break through, as he ripped through, and upon regaining her feet, Katara's mastery of waterbending is making things troubling for them. Getting Azula on her back foot and falling backward, he went in for the final blow. Her eyes and the Avatar's own intense pair locked as she fell, though there was flash of flame and the sound akin to glass shattering. Azula landed on the floor before she shook her head to regain her vision, only to see her dark master standing in front of her, his body in the aftermath of landing a massive punch and the Avatar meters away with his armor completely shattered. The Dark Lord had appeared to challenge the Avatar at last. Standing back to his full height, Sauron towered over the boy, whose eyes had gone wide in horror at the larger-than-life being before him. Katara and Sokka had visages of pure terror. Even Toph seemed to be able to recognize the massive menace before them. His legion, demonic voice rang out darkly, "Welcome, Avatar, you are just in time to witness the beginning of the end. Kumo go cure." "He's done all that?" Swanda said in shock. The other Kage could not help but be in awe of their opponent. Ianwi nodded solemnly. Yes, the Dark Lord had conquered nearly all of the bending nations, and it won't be long now before his eye turns back to the Shinobi nations. At this, that Sachikage grit his teeth. He picked the perfect time for it. Our mind has been so focused on the war and defeating Madara that we failed to see he was playing a bigger game. Tsunade shocked thinks on something Freya told her. That's what she meant. She muttered. Mei was the first to inquire. Lady Tsunade, what do you mean? Tsunade turned to the others, a look of true horror on her face. Battle of Ba Sing Se. Fire legions and orc hordes rushed through the outer city, cutting down any that challenged them. Wargs and werewolves rushed through the streets rapidly, tearing apart anyone that got in their way. Vampires of different natures, from humanoid to monstrous, tore people apart and fed on their blood. Behind them, in the perfect mold of phalanx and testudo, the disciplined Urukai march forward, their long spears skewering any who were foolish enough to get too close. Earthbenders grabbed the civilians they could but had little chance against the massive and fast-paced horde. Eventually all who could made it to the inner city where the defenses were even greater, but that would not stop Sauron's hordes, as more siege towers moved to them, but now for some reason they did not move forward. Only the Nazgul are harassing the people within the walls. But aside from that it was as if they were waiting for something. Ba Sing Se, pain theme. The Dark Lord's form slowly faded to that of his lesser form, his hood drawn over his head. Aang regained his feet as Sauron's piercing eyes looked at him from beneath his hood. To say Katara was terrified was an understatement. She had witnessed all of these horrendous acts at the hands of the Dark Lord's forces, but to see the being leading them, she now understood how he was able to. His power was so evident that her legs were shaking. For Zuko there was awe of the man who instrument not only his father's death, but the conquering of the whole of the bending nations. In truth, he was conflicted between attempting to avenge his father, or accepting the gift of freedom and the chance to return home. Self-preservation helped him choose the latter. Now where the others felt terror and awe, Azula felt fascination, on the verge of obsession and infatuation. She had always been drawn to power, and here stood the mightiest and most powerful being in the world by war. It was in this moment that the Shadow and the Avatar speak. Aang was the first to lash out. "Call off your attack," he demanded, summoning the diamond armor once more and extending diamond blades. Sauron only gave a menacing grin before speaking. A more human, but no less deadly voice rang out in response. "It's too late for that, boy, just as you are too late to stop me. Even now my forces stand at the inner gates of Bas Sing Se." Aang growled, "Don't you realize that you are causing the total destruction of innocent lives?" he roared. Sauron frowned for the first time due to Aang's naivete. "All beings are guilty in one way or another, boy," he growled, "a father neglecting children, a neighbor harming his fellow, the strong taking advantage of the weak. Did you not notice that within the inner city not only is it the domain of the higher class, but only by a strong hand can this world truly achieve peace?" Sauron told him, "not the ideological sense of keeping things in balance." Aang retorted, though he abandoned a battle stance, "It is only through balance that peace can be achieved, by respecting one another and being kind to one another." At this Sauron laughed, and despite the fact that he wasn't utilizing his horrifying voice, it was no less haunting. "So you subscribe to the power of friendship? Foolish boy, there are those in this world who would crush others without a second thought to get ahead. They care not for friendship, but for power, and they use that power to harm and dominate others. And you deem yourself different from those you just described?" Aang asked. "You have declared war on the elemental nations, killed and butchered, all for the sake of the domination of the elemental nations. You think too narrowly, boy," he said, again placing Aang on the naive level of a child. "I do this with purpose and intent, not the blind ambition such as the late Fire Lord." This caught Aang off guard, but to be truthful, I am not without my own wicked deeds. After all, now a vicious and sadistic grin ripped across his face. "I orchestrated the destruction of your people." The eyes of everyone, even Azula, went wide in shock at the revelation that had just been crashed upon them. The true cause of the 100-Year War, the one who had the air-bending people wiped out, was in fact not the Fire Lord Sozin, but rather the Dark Lord Sauron. "You?" Aang shuddered in fury. Katara's eyes widened in fear, not of Sauron, but for Aang. He was about to lose control. "You monster," he roared, charging forward with diamond blades drawn. The grin never left Sauron's face as he charged as well. Diamond and Morgul swords clashed so powerfully that all felt the impact in their bones. Naruto OST, Scarlet Letter. The two began their dance of death, not as fast nor acrobatic as when the Shadow bested Sasuke, but it was no less deadly. Aang was donned in the strongest material known to man. But the Dark Lord's armor he had forged himself, with his knowledge of sorcery and every substance that made this world. Not even the diamond blades would pierce his armor. Upon realizing this, Aang instinctively began to aim for Sauron's head, but the accumulation of being a battle-hardened warrior and sorcerer older than time, and the skills of perhaps one of the deadliest ninjas in the Shinobi world, he was able to avoid or redirect every blow. For this whole time period, the others could only watch in awe as an enraged Avatar completely let loose. Their movements were akin to a vicious dance, but the Avatar was struggling, and they both knew that one wrong move in footwork, one misjudges of a strike, and it was certain death. While the diamond blades could not pierce the Shadow's armor, Sauron's own cursed blade, however, was slowly making scratches and cuts all along Aang's armor, a feat none thought possible. But then again, in his Titanus form, he had shattered the very same armor in one punch. Realizing this, Aang leapt back and began to utilize his bending abilities. Air, water, and earth, all that he had learned, he now used against the shadow. But the Dark Lord's pure speed allowed his to avoid the blows. When Aang began to earthbend to alter the environment and destroy him, pillars and spikes ripped up from the ground before he sent them toward him in an attempt to crush him. But Sauron utilized his own method of bending in order to either redirect the attacks with a wave of his hand, or shatter the attacks. Snapping out of the stupor, Katara realized she needed to calm Aang down, or else he would exhaust himself. However, her attempt to leap into action was halted by a sudden jab to her thigh. It felt like a small knife had gone into her. Looking up, she was surprised by the sight of an unknown woman. She appeared to have the same blind eyes as Toph, but violent veins pulsed around them and she was very clearly looking right at her. "You will not interfere," she said hatefully, before grabbing her by the hair and twisting an arm around her back. The cry of pain was just loud enough to catch Aang's attention, who glanced at her only for a split second. However, that was the only opening the shadow needed, as shifting to Aang tried to bend, and in that moment Sauron made his move. Charging forward, he immediately shifted to his titanic form. With a swing of his mace, not only did he catch Aang right in the chest, but completely shatter his armor and send him shipping against the ground. And OST. Such power was behind the blow that the whole cavern shook, stalactites dropping from the ceiling causing many to dodge the falling debris lest they become crushed and impaled. With blurry vision, Aang watched as the Dark Lord slowly walked to him, unaffected by the falling debris. He looked over at Katar, whose watery eyes of pain and despair locked with his own. He looked to Sokka and Toph, who the Daily had subdued and restrained. He realized that in order to save them, he had to do something he had refused to do. Looking back to Katara, he muttered two words, "I'm sorry," before bending a diamond dome around himself. Avatar OST, Avatar State. At this, Sauron halted as the diamond dome began to glow from within, before Aang ripped himself out and flying high into the air. His tattoos and eyes all filled with the same bright power. He had entered the Avatar State. Hope began to fill Aang's compatriots as they thought that with the Avatar State he might be able to defeat him. All the while Sauron did nothing, only look up at the Avatar as his tattered cape billowed in the wind Aang was producing. His mace even vanished as his simply stood there. He needed no weapon. With two words he shattered their hope and sent them falling into the depths of despair. "Do it!" There was a sudden flash of blue and a massive explosion, muffling out Katara's screams. "Kumo go cure." "You cannot be serious," that Sasuke said with fear in his voice. He looked ready to have a heart attack. Tsunade's visage was sober as the others are filled with horror at what she's been telling them. "Think about it," Shikaku told the others, "these beings have been around for a long time. It makes sense that they have been planning for such a long time." Mithune spoke up, "This contest has been battled since near the beginning of the world. It's no surprise that their plans are so layered. They've watched the world torn apart and remade to the time of the Sage of Sixth Paths all the way until today. It's logical that what she says is true." They were all quiet as they all thought on what Tsunade had revealed about their guest. Hours ago in the torture and interrogation chamber, Naruto OST, Prophet. Her knuckles were bloody. She had completely let loose into the bitch, but as it so happens, vampires were frighteningly durable. As such, while she had certainly done damage, her hands were bloody and shaking. She was certain there was a bone or two she certainly needed to heal later. But for now, she was still glaring daggers at the woman who apparently had her boy's darkened heart. "You will answer me, bitch," she growled. "Where is Naruto?" Spitting blood, Thuringwethil looked up to the woman. "You mean Sauron?" Tsunade growled, "That's not his name." "Don't be naive," she scolded. "He has not gone by that name. It might as well be a different man. Sauron is not going to be swayed from his goal." Ba Sing Se. In that very same moment, the palace gates were slowing being battered down. The people of the inner city and those who had made it from the lower city cowered behind soldiers who were terrified, but no less determined to fight to defend their people. "You don't get it, do you?" Freya asked Tsunade. "You're playing his game." In that moment Sauron blasted the palace doors off his hinges with the thrust of his hands. Everyone turned to see the Dark Lord standing at the entrance. At the same moment a fire greg burst through the palace gate with an almighty roar, though upon seeing his master he and the forces of darkness halted. And while trying to come up with what to do next, he's already 10 moves ahead. Idly he threw the corpse of Ba Sing Se's ruler down the stairs and at the feet of his people. They looked back up to the Dark Lord, and in that instant their resolve shattered. For within his grasp lifted to the sky, hung a bloody and scorched avatar, a deadly wound on his spine, cutting him off from the avatar state. Upon seeing this sight, the warriors of Ba Sing Se dropped their weapons, knowing they had been outflanked and outmatched. Their leader dead, and their savior broken. With Checkmate already in sight. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.